little fewer people than I would have expected, but maybe that's a good thing. We're just got, we've been doing so much of this, and I sent out that second text today, hoping to gather a few more people, but then at the same time, it says it's going to be repetitive. So maybe that scared a few, not scared, but they say if it's going to repeat himself, then maybe no sense in chatting with them. But I got to tell you, I sat through another training today. And there's still a couple of things that I'm still tweaking as I go through my thought process here. So for those of you that have been through this more than once, I think what I currently have, and I'm sure I'll make some changes, and I'm sure there'll be a tweak here and there. And frankly, I'd be shocked. Matter of fact, I already know. I was told this morning, CAR is already making some changes to a couple of the forms. So surprise, surprise. So to that point, I think everybody just needs to just remain flexible, be kind of go with the flow. I'm 100% certain that I'm going to make some different tweaks and some recommendations with at the office level. And as I just said, CAR is already making some changes to the forms. And it's not going to be we'll get them out in December. From what I understand, we might actually see some revisions. I think they're around the margins. I don't think they're significant revisions, but there's going to be revisions nonetheless. So again, if you've attended one or two of these before, there will be some repetition. I assure you there's going to be some new, but I think the way this is presented, I hope when you guys get through this or as we go, you're going to say, okay, that makes a little bit more sense. It's a little cleaner. And if I don't accomplish that goal, then I have failed today. So we're going to jump in. So we're going to go through these forms again. I've got this broken down into two pieces, or I have it broken down into the seller side and the buyer side. So on the seller side, we're going to go through the RLA, the multiple listing service addendum. By the way, we're not going to go through these in their entirety. We're going to go through the pertinent pieces of these that are in relation to the compensation side. So we're going to go through the listing agreement, the MLS service addendum, a couple pieces of the purchase agreement, seller payment to buyer's broker, buyer's compensation, the modification forms. We will then, after we get done with that, maybe get to the additional agent, maybe not. That's really not super pertinent to what we're getting into. The open house, the buyer non-agency. So on the seller side, that's what we plan on going through today. We are going to go through the buyer's form, and my intent is to get through this entire thing today. I don't know that in our prior couple of contract colleges, we've done bits and pieces. It will be a little bit truncated, but I think we're going to hit all of them. So as always, stop me if you have any questions. Just unmute yourself. If I don't see you immediately, just wait for me to take a breath and then just interrupt me. And like I said, for a few of you who have come in late, I finally have this YouTube live stream thing figured out. So I will have this one is currently live streaming as we speak. It will be available on our YouTube channel probably tomorrow, but I finally it's been struggling, but and by the way, if you're looking for, well, what about the last one or what about the one, I will have all of them up. I have them. I just was having a heck of a time getting them edited and breaking them down. So let's jump in. So we're going to jump in with the residential listing agreement. We're not going to go through the entire form. We're going to hit the pertinent stuff. Again, stop me if you have questions. So I just, for reference point, I put August 17th in here as our kind of our drop dead date. Keeping in mind for us, it's really closer to August 13th because the MLS changes, but the actual settlement, it kicks in on August 19th. So we got Sam and Sally Seller and Coldwell Banker, and we've got 123 Main Street as our property. So I think we've gone through this portion enough. So I'm going to go a little faster through this section. I just circled here, which by the way, you have to have a valid listing period. So some of this might have gotten past you guys in the past, but there's a time limitation to listings now by statute in California, not to exceed 24 months. Certainly shouldn't give us any heartburn. I don't know why I put in a 950 list price, but I did. The addendums are the same, so we don't have to, I'm not going to focus much at all on that. Okay, so we've talked about this. Unless you have questions, I'm not going to go deep into this because we've already gone deep into this multiple times. So paragraph C is basically going to be where we're going to sit down with the seller and say, I've already done my presentation. I've already given you my value proposition, and now I'm prepared to ask you for the compensation to Coldwell Banker Town and Country and the listing agent, me, Lance. Okay. So I've got my ability to put in a percentage just like before. I've got my ability to put in a dollar amount just like before. There does seem to be some confusion with this attached compensation schedule. We're not going to be using an attached compensation schedule. I don't know of any agent in this office that currently does that. And just that would be like some sort of something out of the ordinary beyond a percentage or a dollar amount. So maybe someone will show something and I'll be like, wow, that's very interesting. We'll adopt it. But for now, there will be no attached compensate. And I don't have a little X down here, but the same thing applies. So leave that alone. Okay, I'm really, really obsessed with this unrepresented buyer side. Again, we've talked about this a few times, so I'm going to give you the very basic, brief review of this. If you have questions, of course, interrupt me. So read the contract. It says unrepresented buyer. It means unrepresented buyer. This is a buyer without an agent. This is not a double ender. They are representing themselves. Now, I've been thinking about this a lot on a bunch of different levels. I believe that CAR and the attorneys that are formulating this seem to be thinking that we're going to have a percentage of unrepresented buyers. I don't know if it's going to be a big percentage or a small percentage, but the fact that we actually are talking about it and it's in the listing agreement, somebody's thinking that this is going to be an issue. So that being said, I haven't completely thought this through, but I think with my personal business that Drew and Drake and I do, and I believe I'm going to recommend this to everybody in the office, that we actually talk about the possibility of unrepresented buyers. Of course, we should because it's in the listing agreement. We address the concerns that may or may not pose for the transaction and the liability that may or may not pose for the transaction, not only to the seller, because there is liability to the seller. We've got a buyer who may or may not know what they're doing and may make mistakes, and we may, in theory, they probably should have an agent, or they should have an agent, of course. But there's liability associated with us as the listing office going into an escrow with the equivalent of a buyer for sale by owner. Okay. So I'm thinking I want to charge for that. So I've seen a couple of listing agreements that are coming out right now, and basically everybody's leaving paragraph 2C alone. I'm 99% certain, at least with the stuff that Drew and I are, and Drake and I are doing, that we will have a dollar in here, either a dollar amount or maybe 1 point or something like that, knowing full well that if we do open and enter into that transaction with an unrepresented buyer, we as the listing agent and Coldwell Banker Town and Country are going to be doing some work that we otherwise would not do for that party. I don't know how this is going to affect our E&O, but we'll see. So more to follow on the unrepresented buyer in paragraph 2C. I think all of you, however, should be thinking about how you're going to handle that individually. And if you agree or disagree with my assessment that, entering into the for sale by owner equivalent of a buyer is going to create some challenges for us. Okay, this is unchanged. Again, I'm just going to skip over the continuation period and the seller's obligation to previous.
Question.
Yeah, Dwayne.
We end up having to represent that buyer to a point where we're getting paid. Now, do we need some agreement as fiduciary to them also now?
Well, I'm going to answer yes and no because I hear two different questions. So in the way this is, Dwayne, this paragraph 2C, yes, we would be getting paid, but we would not be getting paid by the buyer. We would be getting paid by the seller for the purpose of we are doing additional work and have additional liability, Coldwell Banker, Town & Country, and Dwayne. More work for you, Dwayne, more liability for you, more liability for the company. So our compensation is coming from the seller. We are still in an unrepresented status, and we're going to go through an unrepresented buyer form here in a minute. So we would not be creating an agency with them. We were going to have them sign a form that says we are not their agent. They are not compensating us. So from that perspective, the easiest way, and I'm still trying to come up with, what do we call I guess we're just going to call them an unrepresented buyer. By the way, we've been dealing with this forever. We have unrepresented sellers all the time. We have a name for them. They're called for sale by owners. Okay. And I see you're unmuted, Patty. Give me just a second. So we have a name for those unrepresented sellers called for sale by owners, but this is the deal. For the last 35 years, if I've ever done a training class or talked to an agent about a for sale by owner, I've always talked to them about, be careful. It is impossible to get through an entire transaction with a for sale by owner and not either create an agency relationship with them, or at least create an implied agency relationship with them, which is why for sale by owners can also be very dangerous. But we would not be their agent. We would not be representing them. They would sign a form that says that. And this compensation here would come from the seller. It has nothing to do with the buyer. The seller says, Lance, we're going to pay you more money on top of what we already agreed to pay you, because we know there's more liability and more work. So more to follow on that, but I'm thinking that's what I want to do. Hey, Patty.
It's Jack.
Oh, hey, Jack.
Now, I hear what you're saying regarding, hey, Lance, as the seller, we're going to pay you extra money because you're going to be doing some extra work.
Correct.
But at what point in that process will that unrepresented buyer become our liability, in the sense to where we have to have an agency?
Well, we won't, and I don't want to skip ahead because there's a form for this, okay? And the form is many, many, many slides away from where we are right now. So if you guys make it to the end, let's remember this conversation. Okay, matter of fact, I probably should have brought that form closer up now that I think about it. But the buyer is going, so this is how it's going to work. Jack's the listing agent, okay? And he's got a seller, and I'm the buyer. And I roll into Jack's open house, and Jack says, "Hey, great, Lance, how are you?" And I said, "I'm fantastic." And Jack says, "Well, do you have an agent?" I said, "No, I don't." And I walk around and I just love the house and it's beautiful. And I'm like, "Wow, I love this house. I want to write this up." And Jack said, "Well, again, you don't have an agent. Would you, I'm role playing with myself here." But at some point, Jack stumbles upon the conversation with me that would potentially create a dual agent. Okay, right? We do that all the time. Hey, you don't have an agent. You like the house. We're hitting it off. Would you like me to write it up for you? And then we just created a dual agency situation. So Jack presents that to me and I say, "No, Jack, I like you. You're a great guy, but I have no interest in you representing me. I can do this on my own. I have just defined an unrepresented buyer." Now, again, I've been doing this a long time. And now Jack's been doing it a long time. And Dwayne on this call has been doing it a long time. And a lot of us have been doing it a long time. I've never, ever, ever, not personally or with another agent within the office, to my knowledge or my memory, ever gone into a transaction as the listing broker where the buyer didn't have an agent. Never. Okay. What I just described, we've never done. And has it happened before? I'm sure it has. Maybe the buyer's sophisticated or they're an attorney or whatever. Which, by the way, my attorney example doesn't really work, because if the buyer's an attorney, they're represented by themselves. But this would just truly be just Mr. and Mrs. Average Joe consumer that they decide to represent themselves. So when Jack and I have that conversation, it becomes clear that I'm not going to have an agent. Jack at that point says, "Okay, you're an unrepresented buyer. I'm ready for your offer." Now, in theory, Jack is going to, "Okay, well, when you have your offer written, let me know." Is Jack writing that offer for that buyer? No. If Jack writes that buyer for me, then what is he doing? He's created agency. The buyer starts asking me, if I start asking Jack contract questions and, what does this mean? And what does that mean? And Jack starts answering those questions. What is Jack doing? Jack is creating agency. Okay. So Jack's going to basically have an unrepresented buyer form, which I will sign. It's very clear. It says that this guy doesn't have an agent and Jack doesn't represent me. But again, for those of you that have ever done a for sale by owner, you do the exact same thing. And then at some point between that moment and close of escrow, if you haven't inadvertently created an agency, it's almost impossible, which means you're creating liability, even though they signed a form. And the example I've been using, if we do this, and it's going to happen, escrow closes and we felt we made it through successfully and Jack's happy, Jack's seller's happy. And then all of a sudden, a month later, the buyer, unrepresented, I'm pissed. I get a hold of an attorney. I want to sue somebody for something. And I can guarantee you, in addition to suing Jack's seller, because maybe I'm upset the seller didn't disclose something or the seller did something inappropriate, who else am I going to sue? I'm going to sue Jack and Coldwell Banker. I guarantee it. And for those reasons, I believe we need to be prepared to ask our sellers to pay more money. Now, is this never going to happen? I don't know. Is it going to be 0.5%? I don't know. This could be a nothing issue. And honestly, I hope it's a nothing issue, because if we look back a year from now and 10% of our transactions, which to me is a significant percent, 5% of our transactions are where the buyer was unrepresented, I personally think that's a bad thing all the way around. Okay. So I don't see anybody else unmuted. Hopefully that answered Jack's question sufficiently. Okay, so I'm gonna keep on keeping on. So again, this is the operative page 1 of the listing agreement. We're going to deal with this. This is how much we're getting paid at the brokerage, Coldwell Banker Town and Country. And this would be how much we would be getting paid if there's an unrepresented buyer. I'm repeating myself. There is no language on here for you to put a dollar amount or indicate any sort of compensation for the seller to pay the buyer's broker. Okay. But time out on that. We're going to revisit that here in a minute. Okay, moving right along. This is the bottom or this middle section of page 1, included, excluded. There's nothing new here. I'm not going to spend any time on this. We'll go into this when we do a normal contract college. This is the bottom of page 1. We will be putting in CRMLS for probably 99% of the listings. If you're taking a listing that maybe is up in Big Bear or something like that, you'll put a different MLS up there. I have indicated, and by the way, it's interesting because it's asking you to put this in, but even if you leave this blank, the form MLSA is defaulted. So the form MLSA is going to be an important part of what we're going to be talking about. And I want you to memorize paragraph 5 in MLSA, and we're going to get to that in a minute. So we're basically telling our seller we're in the multiple listing service, and we're going to have a multiple listing service addendum. Pretty straightforward stuff. We're not going to talk about the photographers. We can get into that at a later date. I'm at page 2. Paragraph K, additional terms on page 2. This is really the only place, if you wanted to type something in differently, that you actually have the ability to do it on the residential listing agreement. So I've highlighted paragraph K for a reason. I'm going to give you guys an option on how to potentially deal with some compensation and some payments to buyers, brokers, and some concessions. I very well may come back next week and say, forget that. We're not doing that. But right now, I think I have something that many of you may like. Okay. So when we get to that, I just want everybody to keep in mind, when I give you this option, when you take a listing, you can either take this option or you can not take this option, saying, yes, I like what Lance is doing, I'm going to do that. Or you very well may say, I don't think I like that. That's not going to work. I'm not going to do it. For Drew and I don't know if Drew's on the call. Yeah, Drew's on the call. Okay, so Drew and I are not completely on the same page on this. He's got an opinion that says, I don't know that that's necessary, and he's not wrong. It's just different. And I don't know that I'm right. It's just different. Okay. So this is the deal though. If you like what I'm going to propose, and this is super important, and this is one of those things that is very dangerous on a Zoom call, you can either do what I'm going to propose You cannot do what I'm going to propose, but you're not allowed to modify what I'm going to propose. You either do it or you don't do it. I don't want you to change the language and the words. And if you do, you need to come to me first. And I know I'm talking in code. I'll show you what I'm talking about here in a minute. Hey, Dwayne.
Your forms that you sent out this morning, I'm looking at that side by side with what you have on the screen here. And there is no J on the forms that you sent. I mean, there is a J, but you have K.
And I
additional
agree
term.
with him too.
You guys, are you looking at the, you probably have, hold on, let me get out of here. Are you looking at a version of this? Is that what you're looking at?
Correct.
Okay,
Go back to page 1, please.
Hold on a minute. Hold on a minute. I'm gonna kill you guys. You probably have I have an old link.
It's in red, yeah.
Yeah. Hold on a minute. I'm gonna give you guys a new link. I made some changes and apparently the changes didn't come over. I'm gonna put this in the chat. Okay, public viewing and copy. Okay, so apologize for that. We're making so many changes so quickly, which is interesting, Dwayne, because you were having that challenge on that other thing you and I are working at. I have no idea how that happened. That is so weird. Okay, in chat, I have just copied and pasted the link for this particular deck. Okay, so you should now have the current deck. And I'm going to make more changes to this. So the link I just gave you guys in chat, if I make a change this evening and you come into that link tomorrow, you should have the new link. It worries me a little bit that I might have a ghost in my Canva here, but okay, you've got the new chat, and away you go. Okay, so let me get my people back up here. I can't see. Hey, Dwayne, you're still unmuted. Or did you have another thing or? Oh, okay, good.
No, I'm good.
So paragraph K, and again, just keep paragraph K in mind in a minute. We're going to have potentially some additional terms. Paragraph 4 on page 2 is the compensation to broker deal. Okay. We've talked about this a lot. I'm not going to go into too much detail unless you have some questions, but again, commissions are not fixed. We've got real estate commissioner include the compensation are fully advisable or negotiable. Compensation to the broker, seller agrees to pay the broker the compensation per the agreement, which is up above. Optional additional compensation for unrepresented buyer. We just talked about that. Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I know it's optional. I mean, everything's optional. Everything's negotiable, but I am attempting to articulate why I believe it's worth your money and my value if we do have an unrepresented buyer. So again, we can clean up that language here a little bit. So that's the bottom of page 2. Compensation term. Actually, hold on a minute. Oh yeah, I just put that on too. I wanted you guys to make sure you understand that this was on page 2. So there's more on page 2 coming up here. This is the bottom of page 2. So additional compensation terms. Okay. Compensation is earned and seller agrees to pay broker. This is very similar language to what we've always had in the agreement. If we produce a ready, willing, and able buyer, we're entitled to compensation. Continuation rights. This is what we used to call that safety clause or that protection clause. This is just, hey, if I produced a buyer if you cancel the contract or you terminate it or it expires and I give you a list of the buyers, you're going to owe me some commission up until that point in time. This is not new. So I'm not going to go through this today. Still want to get through the rest of the stuff. Page 3, seller interference, not new language. Hey, if the seller prevents us from executing the listing, they won't let us show it, they won't return our phone calls, they lock the doors, then they in theory could still owe us compensation. Additional again, buyer breach. This is basically, we're going to refer to liquidated damages. This is not new. So again, I'm just putting it on here because it's under the compensation section. So this is not a change, same stuff we've been dealing with forever. Seller compensation obligation to other brokers, again, not new. I'm taking the listing. By the way, have you signed any other listing agreements with anybody else? Is there any other brokers that are laying claim to compensation? If so, please let me know. Not new. I highlighted the paragraph that says there's 24 months is the maximum period of the listing agreement. That's true. By the way, that doesn't preclude you from, if you can't sell the house in 2 years, can you do an extension for 2 more years? Yes, you can. And that's not new, but I think that kicked in about 18 months ago. I can't remember exactly when. Okay, unrepresented buyers. We talked about that. This is where kind of Dwayne was steering me a minute ago. CAR form BNA, buyer non-agency. So when we get to that point in the example I just used with Jack, where he was the listing agent and I was the unrepresented buyer, as soon as that is clear to Jack, and I suppose if I just say I'm unrepresented, I'm in his open house and I walk out and leave, okay, well, that's fine. I mean, relationship is ending and it's done. But if I come back to Jack with an offer that I've written, okay, and now I'm going to give that to Jack very quickly. Jack needs to produce the non-buyer, or excuse me, buyer non-agency form and get that in front of me to execute. Okay. And again, that's at the bottom of page 5. Excuse me, bottom of page 7. So as you can tell, I didn't go through the whole listing agreement. I just hit the highlights in relation to compensation. So before I move on to the next form, do we have any questions on the RLA? Okay, great. Okay, so now we're rolling over into, and again, I'm presenting this in a way as if I was the listing agent. I'm trying to set this up for you guys. If you follow this slide deck, I think that this is an order and a presentation that will make sense to a consumer. Of course, if you guys want to mix it around, have at it. So then I would go into, let me go back a minute. So I'm talking to my seller. I made reference to form MLSA. Okay. Well, guess what I have over here now? Now I have form MLSA. So now I'm going to go through that form. All right. So this is a standalone form. It's brand new. However, most of what's in this form is not brand new. Most of what's in this form used to be in the residential listing agreement. For example, paragraph 1A, B, and C. This was all in the residential listing agreement. They took it out of the residential listing agreement and they put it on this form. Okay. So what's the MLS? Why is it important? If you were to opt out, what does that all mean? So all the benefits of being in the MLS, all of this, I believe it's word for word. I haven't compared word for word, but I'm 99% sure this is word for word, which was what previously was in the residential listing agreement. Including paragraph 3. We've got all of this lovely stuff. So paragraph 1, 2, and 3 has just been pulled into a new form. This is the balance of that form. I got someone in the waiting room. Hold on. Okay. Paragraph 4, the MLS data. This should look familiar to all of you, correct? This all looks familiar. So again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time. So this came straight out. They made it a new form, but here we go. Paragraph 5. Paragraph 5 is new. I have a little notation in my comments, and we'll start to build notes on this as we go in this training. But I want you guys to memorize page 5, or at least as much of paragraph 5, excuse me, as you possibly can, in the same way where hopefully you have at least memorized a sentence or two, like on an agency form. I have a fiduciary duty to the seller, the utmost care, honesty, integrity, and all dealings with the seller. That's word for word, the agency form. I memorized that 35 years ago, and it hasn't changed in 35 years. And I just, boom, there it is. Boom. All right. Now, this is a little bit more than one sentence, but this one bullet point, I think you guys do need to commit to memory. Okay. Concessions may include, but are not limited to, cost of escrow or title, lender fees, repairs, inspections, and buyer broker compensation. Okay. So I did that little panel discussion yesterday at IVAR, and I started off the discussion yesterday. And I want to remind myself and everybody on this training today of what I told everybody in that room. We need to be really, really careful when we're talking about this topic to not focus. As a matter of fact, Dwayne Sanders came in the office the other day, and I'm paraphrasing, but he was like, hey, we're talking a lot about money and talking about compensation and commission, and really we need to focus more on the consumer. And Dwayne's 100% correct. So to that point, we need to be careful when we're having these discussions to not focus only on the buyer's broker's compensation or buyer's broker's commission. Okay, if you do that, we're going to continue to be in trouble with everybody that's looking at the industry right now. So when we're talking about these concessions, we can include, oh, by the way, concessions include buyer's broker's compensation, but we need to memorize this. Concessions may include, but are not limited to cost of escrow, title, lender, repair, inspections, et cetera, et cetera. So I really, really want you to hammer home this paragraph 5, not only to yourself, but to the other agents you're working with, and certainly throughout the transaction. In paragraph 5B, the default in the contract is B1. Seller does not authorize broker to put in the MLS that the seller is willing to consider offers asking for concessions. Okay. Now, I think that's a mistake, and there's 2 pieces to this. One of them is the willingness to consider offers, and then the other one is putting a dollar amount on it. Those are 2 different things. But the default here says the seller does not authorize you to tell anybody you're willing to consider offers with concessions. I think that's silly. Okay. Now, again, Drew and I and a few others have been talking about, well, let's suppose they say we're willing to write me an offer. Yeah, I know my roof looks bad. Write me an offer. If you don't like my roof, write me an offer and either lower the price and say I'm lowering the price because your roof is bad, or give me whatever you think it's worth and ask for a concession, ask for a roof repair of $25,000, whatever it happens to be. So I believe that best practice will be paragraph B2, check the box, and it basically says you're authorizing the broker to put in the multiple listing that you're willing to consider. Okay, you don't have to put the dollar max. You can't even put the dollar amount. It doesn't allow you to. But this, in effect, will allow you to, and I just found this out this morning. And Drew, was anybody on the call with Art Carter this morning? Just either just put your hand up or just unmute yourself really quick. I just am curious at who else was on that call other than me. Okay, Mike was there. I see Mike. Sherry was there. Okay, looks like Mike and Sherry. Okay, well, I'm going to have a question for Mike and Sherry and Drew. Art Carter was talking about the new field, the willingness field. It is a yes, no, but guess what? It's also not a mandatory field, meaning you could see, yes, I'm willing to pay. No, I'm not willing to pay, but you could also see nothing, which is pretty much what we see now. Did you guys hear that the same way? Not a mandatory field?
Yeah, I heard it this exact same way.
Okay. So that kind of, I wish they would make that mandatory, because I don't know, if I see it's just blank, I don't know. It kind of, to me, should I default that they're not willing to consider, or are they willing to consider? But maybe it doesn't matter. To me, let's use my roof example. It's clear as day to anybody standing in front of this house, this roof is a problem. Okay. The seller could tell me as the listing agent, the house is as is. I ain't doing anything to that roof. Okay, that's fine. But don't get upset with me when you get an offer and the buyer asks for a new roof, right? So we'll negotiate that out. So at any rate, paragraph 5, I think, is very important. So I want you guys to focus on that. It's very clear and it's super easy and clear. So just make sure you understand paragraph 5. This is paragraph 6. There's no need. I'm not going to spend any time on the photographs. We've got that dialed in. And then here is the signature block for the MLSA. So MLSA, I believe, is going to be a big part of your listing agreement, a big part of your listing agreement. All right. And paragraph 5 should be a big part of your listing agreement. There's supposed to be a photo here. Hopefully the rest of my deck isn't messed up. So now we're going to go to the RPA. Okay. So on my listing agreement, I'm now going to say, by the way, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, at some point, the goal is to get the property sold, and we're going to receive an offer. here is a 17-page residential purchase agreement. This is what it's going to look like. We don't have to go through it right now. We'll certainly need to go through it when we get an offer. But I'd like to point out paragraph G3 on page 2. It is highly likely that we're going to receive an offer and this box is going to be checked. For those of you that recognize this box, this is the same box that I've been telling you to ignore for 20 months now. This came onto the form in December of 2022, and I said, ignore it. Interestingly enough, for 20 months, California, so it's kind of funny. I don't know why I'm laughing because it's not funny. For 20 months, California Association of Realtors has been preparing us for this moment. And I think they've done a pretty bad job. Considering they knew this was coming and 20 months ago, they put this on the form. Anyway, let's get back to what we're talking about. So I'm explaining this to my seller. We're going to get an offer. The chances of this box being checked is going to be great, which means we need to go over and we need to review what this box means. It's a form, which is the seller payment to buyer's broker form, SPBB. So that is on the bottom or near the top of page 2. We're going to get to that form here in just a second. Matter of fact, we're going to get to that form right now. All right. So now I go to seller payment to buyer broker. The top of the form is pretty simple. So what do we have? This is a very simple form. It's a 1-page form. It starts off with commissions are negotiable and not set by law. Pretty simple. And then and again, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, this is the buyer who's filling out this form. And this is the buyer who is asking this in the same way they would ask for a credit to repair the roof, or in the same way they would ask for you to fix the roof. It's no different. Okay. Except it's specific. In the same way the roof request is specific, this is specific, saying they're asking seller agrees to pay buyer's broker X% or X dollars. I believe you're going to get an offer and this box is going to be checked and there's going to be a dollar amount in there. Okay, now that we've established that, there's a maximum seller payment obligation, and that number that in effect would go in here. Let me just read it. Sellers shall only be obligated to pay their buyer's broker the lower amount of what's specified in paragraph A1, that's here, or the amount the buyer is obligated to pay the buyer's broker pursuant to their broker representation agreement. So we got 2 different things going on over here. Now I'm the buyer, but I'm represented. Dwayne is my agent. Dwayne works with Sanders Realty. He's my agent. Dwayne and I have signed a buyer's representation agreement with Dwayne, and it says I'm going to pay Dwayne 1%. Now Dwayne and I have written an offer. And on this form, Dwayne and me, I suppose, have put in 2%. That's more than what Dwayne and I agreed to. If that's the case, then the seller's not paying 2%. The seller's only going to pay 1%. This is why you are hearing all of the time. This came up in the sales meeting with Rachel the other day about she's going to be requesting buyer's broker agreements to be submitted to her because she wants to verify that number. And we're going to talk about what Rachel was asking for in a minute. But so it's going to be kind of important when you're representing these buyers. If you have an agreement that says that you're going to get paid X, that has to correspond to this, or you have to modify that agreement. I would imagine listing brokers will be asking for this. Okay. So very, very simple. Lydia, I see you're muted. Go for it.
Okay, I have a listing that I had received last night, and I was speaking to my seller precisely this,
Okay.
and I had explained to her about the laws and things like that, and
Okay.
we had a really good discussion about it. So at the ending, I had said that I was going to charge her 2% to
Okay.
take her
So the
listing.
2% to Coldwell Banker Town and Country, correct? Okay, I'm with you.
Okay, and then I explained to her how prior to when I said that, I explained to her prior how we used to do it before, that
Yep.
we would just have a salary 633. And then I explained to her the DOJ and all that good stuff. So
Okay.
but basically, bottom line, we really could just do this whole thing. It's just different ways.
Well, yeah,
Now,
why don't we do this, Lydia? Because I want to, Lydia, hold on.
I'm charging her 3%.
Lydia, hold on. Lydia, I'm gonna mute you, okay? So this is the deal, just stick with me on this. When I get to the end of these forms, if I haven't clarified those individual questions, and I don't want to discourage people from asking questions as we go, but we don't have time to go through narratives. We don't have time for that. But if I don't answer that question by the time we get through this section, then unmute yourself and let's come back, okay? So again, I've now lost my train of thought. So this is the seller payment to buyer's broker form. I'm showing this to my seller. Let me back up. Okay. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, it's entirely possible a buyer is going to write an offer and check paragraph G3, which by the way, every person in this office who is writing an offer effective immediately needs to start checking paragraph G3. Okay. I've been telling you guys for 20 months not to check it. Now we're checking it. So getting back to my seller presentation, they're going to present that. That is basically the seller payment to buyer's broker form. The buyer is probably going to ask you to pay something to their broker. It's going to be represented here. Let's have that discussion. Are you willing to pay anything? This is Drew and I were just talking about this. If the seller says, no, I don't want to pay anything, the equivalent of I'm as is, I'm not going to fix my roof. Okay. Now, maybe using the roof analogy, I know you don't want to fix it, but you really need to fix it and it needs to get fixed. And this is why it needs to get fixed. So we're going to give them our 2 cents worth on that. And you may do the same thing in relation to this particular ask. So let's get through the rest of this form. It's a simple form. Talks about buyer representation and compensation, delivery of it. I mean, it's one page, and the meat and potatoes is paragraph A. That's the meat and potatoes. Okay. So we got a couple other definitions. Then we basically get to the end of the form and we're done. Okay. Now what? Okay. Remember we talked about the text overflow addendum back on paragraph K on the listing agreement. Now, let's suppose I'm talking to my seller and we're back on this page and the seller says, and you say, you know what, you've agreed to pay Coldwell Banker Town and Country X%. In the old days, a portion would also be paid to the buyer's agent. If we're going to continue under that model, let's talk about that. What number here would you be willing to pay? So if that conversation is either directed by you or brought up by the seller, you could use this option. And I don't know if Javier is on the call. Javier asked me, yeah, I do see Javier on the call. Javier and some of you on Contract College, we did this a little while ago, and I did it in the form of an addendum. Okay. I don't think I want to do it in the form of addendum. If you're going to do this, I think you can put it under paragraph K. Okay. And it'll show up on a text overflow addendum, and it's going to look like this. Now, there might be a typo on here. I might need to add a comma or something. This was done relatively quickly, but the spirit of it is there. So this would deal with that. First of all, it's telling you that this is a text overflow addendum to the residential listing agreement, paragraph K. So I'm adding additional terms to the listing agreement. This first paragraph is word for word what's on the SPBB, basically saying the commission rate is not fixed by law, it's negotiable. This is my language. Seller has reviewed California Association of Realtors form MLSA, specifically paragraph 5, and form SPBB, seller payment to buyer's broker. It's the one we just looked at. So we're putting on the addendum. We've talked about it with the seller. We've reviewed it with the seller. Seller is agreeing. Seller payment to buyer's broker. Seller agrees to pay buyer's broker X% of the purchase price or X dollar amount of the transaction proceeds. That is word for word this paragraph 1A. It's word for word. Okay. Let me go back to where I was. The next paragraph, if the amount of, I tweaked it a little bit, but and maybe I won't tweak it. Maybe I'll go back and I'll make it word for word, but this is basically the second paragraph. If the amount is more than any amount requested by the prospective buyer, the amount will be lowered to the amount requested by said buyer. So in other words, if he's said, hey, I'll pay 2%, but the buyer only asked for 1%, then the seller's only paying 1%. It's exactly the same as what's in the SPBB. Okay. So I'm really, really, really comfortable doing this. There's some differing opinions as to whether this is going to be allowed. I'm willing until I'm really told otherwise, because I believe we can do this. That makes perfect sense to me. I'm not creating any additional language except for this last paragraph, which we'll talk about in a minute. And I'm fine with this. Now, a week from now, I might say, oh, we can't do this, but if I thought that was going to happen, I wouldn't do it. I'd say this is where we're going to go. So for those of you that like this, and for those of you that want to do this, this is where you would put it. So I think Lydia was going down this path that says, well, if they wanted to offer something, how would I do it? Well, you would do it right here. And you would put that dollar amount or that percentage right here. Now, this last part, the first sentence, again, is word for word. Seller authorizes listing broker to communicate seller's willingness to consider concessions to the buyers, including buyer's broker's fees as stated above. That comes out of the other agreement. Now, this part doesn't. This is me. This very last sentence. I need to do a little more due diligence on this, but I feel pretty good about it. And the last sentence is seller will allow listing broker to use their discretion when disclosing any concession amount to agreed buyer. So this gives those agents, myself, maybe, well, Rachel wants to disclose all of them. I think Chris was in the middle. John Mankey seemed to not want to disclose. This in effect would say, hey, you trust me, you're paying me, you're authorizing me to sell your largest investment of your life. Let me decide whether or not, when is the right time to disclose or not. Now, some of you might change that. For example, John Mankey or Drew, for example, may say, you've given me this number. However, this number will not be disclosed in advance. Okay. You're going to say there's a willingness, but we may change that. And then instead of using the word discretion, I'm telling you what I'm willing to do, but I don't want you to disclose it. So that would be the scenario where we just say, hey, just submit your offer. Submit your offer, and we're not going to tell you what the dollar amount is. I think this works very well on both sides. So if you use this model, you would put it as part of the RLA, you would type it on paragraph K, and this is the language I would want you to use. I might change a word here and there, but I'll let you know. This is the signature block on that. And by the way, I'll pause there. Okay, I don't see anybody unmuting. I'm going to very quickly go through the broker compensation advisory. Most of everything we've discussed, we've already covered. Hey, Javier.
Paragraph 2K on the RLA.
Okay. I didn't get the full question. You got cut off. Javier, you're muted.
Sorry, I just don't see paragraph 2K on the RLA. I apologize.
Paragraph 2K.
It's the same questions that Dwayne asked.
Paragraph 2K is.
It's 2J. On your form, it's 2K. On our form, it's 2J. It's the same question that Dwayne asked.
Oh, wait a minute. On your form, it's 2J. Hold on a minute. I mean, I just pulled these up. These forms couldn't be any fresher.
I got it, Mike. It should be 2J.
Yes, it's what Dwayne asked in the beginning.
Hold on a minute.
Missed it. Thank you.
Hold on a minute. Thank you, guys. That's always one of my fears about doing these is I misspeak and no one catches it. So RLA. That looks like a K to me. Is that not a K?
Yes, it is a K, but go back to the first page. Let me see if you have 724 revised.
I just pulled this out of the MLS this morning.
See 724 RLA. Well,
What forms, are you guys looking at the forms that are on the drive?
no, it's from Zip Form.
Whatever you sent out this morning, Lance, whatever you sent out this morning in forms, no.
Okay, okay, man, I need to pull those down. Okay, there must have been another change. So what you guys are looking at, if they're on the drive, I need to pull those down. Those, apparently there was a change and I missed them. So it's 2K. I just pulled this out of Zip Forms this morning. Okay, so
There is no 2K. I'm sorry, I can't find it. 2K, like in canine. I don't see it.
okay, hold on, guys. Let's just do this together. Let's jump into the old CAR. If anybody else wants to do this on their own, CAR, please do so. We're doing it live. All right, so we're gonna go into this transaction. Now, I will tell you the form I'm using. This is. Okay, so this is July 24th. Let's go to my documents. So where my residential, where's my RPA at? California Residential Purchase Agreement.
Just pulled up a listing agreement. There is 2K.
Actually, I did the listing agreement. Hold on, I did the R. So am I right or am I wrong?
No, disregard. Sorry.
Well, let's get it here for everybody. Hold on a minute. Hold on a minute. Sorry, I don't know if you guys have had your Zip Forms moving slow though. It seems like Zip Forms is so slow now. Residential listing agreement. Okay, so let's pull it up. So here it is, straight out of the deal.
Yeah, 2K.
And paragraph 2K. Okay, so if you're looking at, when you guys are saying I sent you something, I think what you're referring to are when we were going through all the templates and we were putting them on there, and then we had kind of what we thought were the final draft. Apparently there was a change, and which is crazy because that's not that old. Apparently there was a change that reordered those. So it is paragraph. Well, the 2 starts way up here, you guys. So paragraph 2. Okay. Are we all together on this?
Yep.
You're
Okay.
talking about listing agreement, correct?
I'm on the listing agreement. This is the residential listing
All
agreement.
right.
Residential listing agreement.
I never thought I was so incompetent, but I can't find a 2K on it. It stops with 2J. And then-
Let me help you out here because it could be
Yeah.
easy to do. Page 1,
Yeah.
residential listing agreement. There's number 2.
Yeah,
We're going to scroll down. A, B, C, D, E, F, G,
yes,
H, I, J, K.
J, and it stops at J. I'm sorry. It just
You don't
stopped.
have it. Are you in Zip Forms?
No, I just pulled it up what you posted.
Guys, get rid of that. That's okay. My bad. Matter of fact, I'm gonna do that right now. I can't stand it. I'm gonna get rid of it. So actually I'm
We
not gonna,
all have to go to Zip Form now, correct?
well, I can put up the new ones. Honestly, I did not realize there was a change between what I had posted previously and what's in Zip Forms. I am in Zip Forms right
Right.
now. So
Let's
two
go to Zip Form.
2K, but that's a good catch though. That's a good catch. I did not know that was the case. Okay, so let's go back to where we were. So if you want to do that, and by the way, I'm doing this. So I'm recommending you do it. The only thing I'm going to verify is, do I have this word discretion? I want to make sure that that's appropriate. Okay. So you'll have your opportunity to do that. Now, just to cut to the quick on this, and again, Drew and I are going back and forth on this earlier. Some of you may choose to negotiate the commission paid to Coldwell Banker Town and Country and you as the listing agent. And you may choose, it says, hey, this is the deal. Let's just see what they bring us. Let's just see what they bring us. We don't even have to talk about what, if anything, you want to pay to the buyer's broker. They may not ask you to pay anything. Or we might spend and talk about this time about 2%, 2.5%, 3%, and they may only come in and ask for 1%. That's that roof analogy. And I guess we're going to find out. Okay. So, but if you think you want to have that discussion in advance, then that is at least one method to do so that I'm happy with. Okay. Buyer's broker compensation advisory. This is just a 2-page advisory form like the seller advisory, buyer advisory. This just goes through and it just restates that the commission's negotiable and it kind of goes through that piece. So we've already talked about this. I put the entire form on here, but I'm not going to go through this in any specificity. But I do think you should be at least presenting and reviewing pieces of this form with your clients. Okay. And again, here's maybe a nice way to introduce a buyer negotiating the seller compensation. So if you're struggling, it's one thing I've discovered if you struggle with how to present something to a client, sometimes just read the form. And the form itself actually, hey, we're on paragraph B. This is a very nice segue into how to present something like that. Hey, Lydia. Oh, you.
Okay, real quickly, on the listing that I had took a few days ago,
Okay.
On the addendum on 3B, where it says addendum,
Okay.
and at the addendum, I had checked and I put compensation to broker, and then I checked the other one right here. It says compensation to terms. Is that correct?
What paragraph are you on? You're on the listing agreement?
Yes, I'm on the listing agreement, and it's actually 2 of 7. And it's for advisory and addendum.
You're on.
addendum.
Well, you know what? I'm not sure what form you're on. I
I'm
don't want to get derailed. Let's talk about that afterwards because I'm not really sure what you're describing to me. So hold that comment and you and I can talk about it after. Or if you want to take a screenshot and put it in chat, that'll be helpful. Okay. So on the advisory, this might be a nice way for you to kind of go through and chat about it. Very simple form. I think very quickly, once we kind of get comfortable with this will kind of be one of those forms like the seller advisory and the buyer advisory. We kind of put it in front of them. We go through it a little bit and it becomes a little bit less of a deal. I heard someone yesterday at one of the talks we were doing say, hey, this is a big deal if we make it a big deal. And I agree with that, So, I mean, if we're coming into this full, and it is a big deal, don't get me wrong, but if we're coming into this like in a panic mode, that's probably not the right approach. Okay, so that's a buyer compensation advisory. We have the modification of terms. I'm not really going to go through this form a whole heck of a lot. This is modifying that existing form. You can change your price. For a minute, I thought I might do my commission thing here. I like it better on the text overflow addendum than I like putting it here. This is too cramped. There's not enough room, but you could use this form MTLA to modify. That would be a brand new listing. That's a listing that you just took today. Okay. Now, you guys, if you were on the call earlier with Ed and Art, I think it was Art made a big deal about this form. Okay. Matter of fact, Drew even, I think, had called me and said, hey, make sure we mention this form today. Okay. So let's take a little extra minute. And why is this form so important? So this is the form DMLA. And what do we got here? Okay. Disclosure and modification to a listing agreement. Well, doesn't that sound like what we just did? Well, it is, except this is for listings that we took prior to the change. Okay. So you took a listing 2 months ago and you're kind of under the old rules. So we need to be prepared either right now or certainly no later than the 17th, but frankly, probably right now, is go to those listings, take a moment and go through the discussion. Okay. Offering compensation to brokers representing buyers through the multiple listing service. And it basically is now explaining to your current seller that you took 2 months ago that there's been some changes. Okay. So if you've already had this discussion with your seller, or maybe your seller's had it with you. Yeah, I get it all the time. I get these people, I mean, friends of mine, not random people necessarily, but friends of mine say, what's this commission stuff? You know, so there's people talking about it. So if you haven't already had this conversation with your seller that you listed 2 months ago, here's your introduction. It talks about the NAR settlement. It talks about no longer having dollar amounts or commissions in the MLS, and just brings them up to speed. And then it in effect says, by the way, we need to modify your listing agreement. Okay, pretty straightforward stuff. Any questions on that? I think I think they did a nice job with this. I guess the real question is, are people actually going to do this? Okay, so if you have, and Drew and I and Drake and Paul, we're going to need to go through our current age listing inventory, and we need to go into SkySlope anyway. We need to make some SkySlope changes. So there's going to be a new required form in SkySlope on any listing that was taken, you know, prior to a week ago or whatever it is. And we're going to need to put this form, get them to sign that, get this in there. Okay, I don't see anybody unmuted, so it sounds like we're good there. Okay, open house advisory. So now I'm holding an open house. People need to sign in. People need to, you know, this is the requirement that they said, hey, this works for the DOJ and the settlement. So this is basically saying, hey, you're a visitor. You want to see the house. Cool. Okay. Agent does not represent the visitor. I'm not your agent. Okay. Unless, of course, we do a separate deal. Communication with agent and open house property to or benefit for the seller. Okay. This is just full disclosures, but then at the end, or not the end, communication not confidential. Okay, fine. Visitor writes an offer on the property through an agent. Again, that's fine. It's going to define who's an agent. I don't really even want to, this part is not really the meat and potatoes of it. This is the sign in. Okay. So you're going to, in theory, use this sign in. I'm Lance Martin. Do I have an agent? No, none. NA. Here's my email and here's my phone. Or, hey, I'm Lance Martin. Who's my agent? Yeah, Jack Pike. Jack Pike is my agent. All right. Does that mean Jack's with me? Maybe he is. Maybe he's not. Okay. But now this buyer can sit back and say, hey, I'm unrepresented or I am represented, and they can put that information down there. We talked about this one in the sales meeting. This is just truly CAR trying to make sure we're compliant. They don't want anybody coming in and looking at a property that doesn't have an understanding of what the agency relationship is. So it'll be interesting to see if this form survives in this existing context or whether it gets changed or not. So, but for now, this is your open house sign-in form. Hey, Jack.
I go into the open house, they ask me for my name and if I'm represented by an agent. I say,
Yeah.
yes, I am, but I want you to be my agent.
Okay. Then you would do a couple things. Okay, so you're okay, so I'm the listing agent, not the open house. You come in and you fill this out and you say, yes, I have an agent, and it's Herman Jansen is my agent, a Coldwell Banker. And I'm like, okay, wonderful. And then you say, oh, but I want you to write the offer. Is that the scenario, Jack? If that is a scenario, again,
Yes.
okay, well, buyers get to choose. So my question to you would be, have you signed a buyer broker agreement with the other agent? If you say no, then I'm going to ask you to sign a buyer broker agreement with me, and then we're going to write an offer. If you say yes, we're going to need to define, and we're going to get to that in a minute, by the way. So maybe this will come up, not maybe, this will come up again before we end today's session. But if you say, yes, I want to work with you, Lance, but I did sign a buyer broker agreement with somebody else, then we got to figure out, is that exclusive? Is that non-exclusive? And whether or not you have the ability to cancel that. And if you do have the ability to cancel it, we need to cancel it before you and I do business. And this is a good segue because we're actually going to go through that exact scenario here in the next, half hour to 45 minutes. So stand by on that. But the short answer is, yeah. Think of it this way, guys. Buyers choose. Okay. Now, sometimes the buyers want to choose and they want to fire who they're working with. Well, that doesn't mean that they don't have compensation that they might owe. So that might change who they choose. They're like, well, shoot, I don't really like this other agent. I really want to work with you, but I signed a contract with this other agent and they're not going to let me out of it. So it's going to depend on if it's exclusive or not. And again, stand by on that. We're going to be there any minute now.
Question, do we give this form to anybody or everybody who signs in?
Well, you're not giving them this form. This form is for you. They're signing in. This is the equivalent of an open house sign-in sheet.
All right, I think it's way too much on there, and a lot of people just do not want to sign in, period. You may
Correct.
do that. So
Yep.
letting anybody who walks into an open house, this form is like a total turnoff.
Yeah, agreed. And we talked about this in the sales meeting on Tuesday. I agree with Herman 100%. We live in the real world, and you're going to run into people that are not going to sign this. Our office policy as of right now is if you are the listing agent holding an open house and you have this form available and the buyer chooses not to sign it, I'm assuming you're going to do what you've done for the last 20 years is you're going to say, okay, and they're going to walk around the house and that's going to be that. It would be silly to say, okay, fine, get out of my open house. You've given them the option to sign. They've chosen not to. That's their decision. What are we going to force them to sign the property or throw them out of the house? So I have no problem. I have no problem with that. Herman's 100% correct. And it's been that way for the beginning of the time. Anybody who holds open houses on a regular basis knows that not everybody's going to sign their sign-in sheet. Hey, Mike.
But I think it's Ed or Art. They said if they start asking questions, then you need to do the BRBC. Questions about other properties.
Yeah, there are. And this is the thing, and you're correct. And I spent a lot of time last week at Inman with Ed and Art. And I mean, a lot of time, multiple hours, one-on-one. And I just got off the seminar with them. I think I said this before. I agree with Ed on about 94% of what he's proposing. And then I just flat out 100% disagree with him on a few other things because I live in the real world. Okay. So there are a lot of triggers that, Mike is potentially a buyer and we're chatting. And at what point exactly did Mike and I create an agency relationship? What moment in time? He asked a specific question. I gave a specific answer. Was that question and that answer enough to create an agency? Well, without going through a specific, because I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, the answer to that could be yes or no. Depends upon what he asked and what I answered. But those things are going to sort themselves out. What I don't want you guys to be paralyzed. Okay. I trust you guys that you're doing the right thing and you have the consumer's interest at heart. And again, Dwayne, after the meeting on Tuesday kind of came in, I think, to remind me at the end of the day, we have to focus on the consumer. Okay. So if we're doing what's in the best interest of the consumer all the time, the buyer and the seller, we're going to be okay. So some of those things where an attorney with CRMLS, which by the way, there are attorneys at CAR that have given me different responses to the same question than I've got from attorneys with MLS. Okay. So some of this isn't settled, Mike. I guess that's what I'm saying. So, but to Mike's point, you're paraphrasing Ed at some point in that conversation. If you start to create agency and you're going down that question of answering certain questions, you need to not only get a BRBC, but you basically have an agency form. Okay. I used this example yesterday when I did the talk at the Inland Valleys Association of Realtors. Nobody does this. Nobody does this. And this has been the rule since I've been in the business for 37 years. Let's use the open house example. Okay. Mike Saleh walks into my open house. We're chatting it up. Okay. But next thing you know, 45 minutes go by and he's asking me questions and I'm answering them. Real estate questions, negotiation questions, financing questions, 1031 exchange questions. He's asking, I have created an agency relationship with Mike. In theory, Once I've done that, I need to pull out an agency disclosure relationship form that says, hey, Mike, you might not have realized it, but I just created an agency with you. Now, Mike might say, well, no, you didn't. And I'm like, okay, thank you. Oh, by the way, now sign this non-agency form. Now, this is the deal. That's the letter of the law. Nobody does that. Now, I don't want to encourage anybody here. We're not going to play fast and loose with this. We're not going to try to skirt it. But on this open house example, let's just see what happens over the next couple of weeks. Let's go next couple of months. To Herman's point, if someone comes in and they don't want to sign your form, I have no problem with you saying, okay, I understand. Take a look around. Here's my flyer. If you have any questions, wait a minute, you're going to answer questions? Yes, I'm going to answer questions. Okay. At what point am I going to, we're all going to answer questions. Lance, you know what the school district is? Yeah, it's, Riverside Unified. Okay, great. You know how old the roof is? Yeah, the seller tells me it's 3 years. Did that create agency? Probably not. But at any rate, let's just be fluid on this. Okay. Now buyer or tenant non-agency. Okay, so we talked about this earlier. So I think this was Jack's example earlier when we were at the on the listing agreement talking about the non-represented buyer. Okay. So let's just use that example, or let's stick with the open house example. So we have a non-represented, they use buyer or tenant non-agency. So we've got the clients up here and who they are. And that's all well and good. And what are we doing? No representation. I wish they did a buyer tenant. It just drives me crazy. No representative of the buyer by the seller's broker. Okay. I'm not representing you. Okay. Man, I'm really going to beg them to get rid of this seller, landlord, buyer, tenant. That's going to drive me nuts. So this would be the form that we would put in front of that buyer that says, I don't have an agent. I want to write an offer on this house. Oh, and by the way, you're not my agent either. I am unrepresented. I'm representing myself. Okay. I am the equivalent of a for sale by owner. The listing agent at that point says, I understand. When you send me the offer, I will be putting this form in front of you. Okay. And we're not representing them. Period. Okay. Clear? All right. Then we've got, again, what does this mean? Representation of seller by seller's broker. So I'm going to leave the word landlord and tenant out. Seller's broker will act as the agent of the seller exclusively during any negotiation or transaction of the property. I'm not your agent. Statutory agency confirmation. We're going to fill out a Kate, and we're confirming. Seller's broker shall confirm the agency relationship described above or modified. I represent the seller exclusively. Okay, not a dual agency. Other advice. Buyer is advised to seek real estate, legal, tax, insurance, title, desired advice from appropriate professionals. Don't ask me any of these questions. Now, it's funny because we do this. I do this all the time in a normal transaction. And I hope we don't have any of these, but let's suppose we have one. And this unrepresented buyer is on my deal and he asked me a question. Hey, Lance, what's going on with insurance? I'm having a hard time. And I say, you know what, this is the deal. Insurance is difficult. Carriers are leaving California. There's a million reasons. Oh, by the way, I'm not an expert on title or insurance. Refer to paragraph 6, seek legal advice. So anytime, this is what I would tell you guys to do on a for sale by owner. Okay, let's go back 5 years. You have a for sale by owner and the owner needs help on a question on a transfer disclosure. You try to help them out. You try to push them in that direction. You also remind them, oh, by the way, I'm not your agent. And by answering that question, I'm not creating an agency. Oh, and by the way, you need to confirm what I told you, and you need to seek the appropriate legal tax advice. Now, some of you might be just saying, well, just don't answer the question. Yeah, great. Just don't answer the question. But I also live in the real world. And when you're in these situations with the for sale by owner or unrepresented buyer, I can assure you there's going to be some guidance given, which makes this difficult and agency gets created. So here's your non-agency form. Pretty simple. Okay, so you can see we've gotten to a new section. So I'm going to go back. So the forms that we just covered are the forms that I believe you should be going over with your seller. Now, not necessarily all of them. So let me go back to my summary pages. So when I'm on my listing appointment, I believe you're going to need to go through the residential listing agreement, the multiple listing service addendum, a couple of paragraphs of the RPA, a couple of paragraphs of the seller payment to buyer broker, and the buyer compensation advisory. I think that gets you 99% of what you need in 99% of the cases. I, by the way, have the text overflow addendum on here as well. The modification of terms comes later. This disclosure of modification of terms only comes on those current listings we have, and then this form won't be necessary in a few more months. Okay. Additional agent, you don't need to bring that up. Additional broker, you don't need to bring that up. Single party compensation is not going to be necessary. These two are probably not being brought up on a listing presentation. I suppose you could if you wanted to go over super detail, but I don't think these need to be dealt with on a listing presentation. I think you just deal with these 5 forms, and I think you've got everything you need to present a nice cohesive package to your seller and explain it. And frankly, if you do it in the order I just laid it out, I think it works pretty well. So, and by the way, I've been talking to you guys for an hour and 15 minutes. If this was a listing presentation, I don't think it would take me any longer than an hour and 15 minutes to do what we just did. So if you like the way that's laid out, there's your template, go run with it. Okay, now let's work our way to the buyer's forms, which we really haven't done too much of this. We've been focusing so much on the listing side. It seems like whenever we get to the buyer's side, we run out of time. We're almost there. Okay, so on the buy side, this is what we have on the buy side that we're going to deal with. Okay. In some ways it's easier, and then, but because we're not familiar with talking commission to a buyer in the way that we're going to now have to talk to commissions and buyers, this is going to be easier, but probably more uncomfortable for many of us. So we're going to go over the BRBC, the shorter version of the BRBC, the property showing and representation agreement. We've had some dialogue on both of these. Zillow has a new form out, which we're going to talk about. I want to get your guys' input and opinion. I believe at some point when I'm going to be talking to my buyer about compensation that I'm going to ask them to pay me, I think I need to maybe at least reference the listing agreement and how the relationship between the seller and their broker is. Some of you might think that that's not necessary, and I don't know that I would argue with you. I would also maybe bring up the multiple listing service addendum. Okay. I'm definitely going to bring up the RPA and the SPBB, because if I'm going to ask a buyer, especially a buyer that doesn't know me, this is a brand new lead that just, called me and wants to see my listing, or maybe they're an internet lead or from coldwellbanker.com or from Zillow, whatever it happens to be. Okay. Those people don't know you. So if I'm going to ultimately put this form in front of them and ask them for compensation, I think I'd better be prepared to say, oh, but by the way, when we write the offer, we're going to check this box. And then when we check this box, we're going to fill out this form. And on this form, we're going to ask the seller to basically pay my commission, because I know you don't have it. Now, how you communicate that and in the order you communicate that, I think is going to be very important. Okay. So we're going to go through these forms. By the way, the buyer's broker compensation is the same form. We've been talking a little bit about this buyer financial personal information. I don't even want you guys touching that. We're not going to mess around with that. Buyer identification and preferences, we're not going to go through this today. I don't think this is going to be a form that's ultimately going to survive and actually be used. Buyer material issues, same thing. I don't think any of these 3 forms will be used heavily by any of you. I just don't see that happening. The cancellation of buyer maybe, but look at this in 2 ways. If you're signing a buyer's broker agreement and your buyer's canceling it, well, okay, well, that kind of stinks. But we had a phone call earlier today. Misty called and there's a buyer that wants to work with either Chris or somebody on Chris's team. And Chris said, great, love to help you out. They want to write an offer on his listing, apparently, or somebody's listing on the team. And Chris had asked him, hey, well, are you working with somebody? They said, yes. Like, oh, well, what have you signed? Apparently the buyer didn't even know. Okay, well, you need to find that out, because depending upon what they signed, some are easier to cancel than others. So again, we'll go through the cancellation, and then these are the disclosures, the modifications. And again, notice of broker involved properties, with the exception of the cancellation form, when it comes to working with buyers, and again, hopefully the cancellations few and far between, these forms I do not believe are going to be very well circulated or very well received. You know what? Hold on a second, guys. My laptop battery needs to be plugged in. Give me just a second. I got to find a plug.
Hi, everybody. I'll be your entertainment while Lance is gone. I'm gonna sing a song.
Dwayne, do it, baby, do it. That's awesome. Well, actually, sing a little bit longer song, because my charger's in my car. I'll be back in 1 minute.
I'm waiting, Dwayne.
Okay. Here we go.
You're so cute.
Are we gonna do a sing-along?
I'm
That'll
back.
work.
Okay, all right, sorry about that. Okay, so just to kind of reset and get back. So when you're working with the buyers, it's either going to be the BRCC, the PSRA, potentially a private form. And by the way, you might stagger these, and we'll talk about what I think could be a best practice. I'm getting a lot of pushback and a lot of disagreement on what I'm going to tell you. So I'd be curious to see if we get some pushback or disagreement here. But you're going to be using one of these three forms, or maybe all of these three forms, and then referencing a listing agreement, referencing maybe the listing of referencing the residential listing agreement, multiple service listing agreement, the purchase agreement, and the SPBB. This would be one that if you're working with a lot of buyers, I think it would be wonderful. I'm going to do this myself. I'll post it, and then you guys can copy it if you like it, to shoot maybe like a 90-second video, just saying, hey, buyers, let me just play it out on my own. So don't judge me, because I haven't completely thought this through. But hey, Mr. and Mrs. Buyers, so excited you called. I can't wait to show you 123 Main Street. You may be aware there's some changes on the commissions and how we get paid. So I just wanted to take a 90-second video and explain to you, when I meet with you today, the new requirements ask that you sign a broker compensation agreement or a representation agreement with me. I have a couple of options with you. If you've thought that through, we might use option one. If you're really uncertain what you want to do, we might use a different option. By the way, I'm referring to these forms, okay? Also, because I love Linktree, Dwayne was teasing me that I love my Linktrees. On my Linktree with my video, I've given you a copy of some of these forms. You can click on those and you can take a look at it. But I just want you to be aware. So excited. I can't wait to meet you out at 123 Main Street. If you have any questions on these forms when you get there, that'll be great. And I look forward to talking to you. Something like that. I don't know. I'm sure we can do something better than that. But just give them a little something. Okay, so let's jump into it. So we're going to start with the buyer's record. So this is the big one. Okay. So this is the 5-page. I'm so confident in my skills and my ability. I'm going to throw it all at them. All right. So it's, again, I've just dated it on the 18th. By the way, the default on this is non-exclusive. Very, very important. The default is non-exclusive. And when it comes to cancellation, you guys will see the importance of non-exclusive as opposed to exclusive. So it's a non-exclusive agreement by default. What's the deal? How long is this going to be? These agreements cannot exceed 3 months. After 3 months, if you're still working with the buyer, you can extend it. The other one we're going to talk about, the PSB, whatever it is 30 days. So that's one of the things, if you're going to compare the two forms side by side, you might like this one better because you can do 3 months instead of 30 days. The default, non-exclusive. If you want it to be exclusive, you must check the box. Okay. And I think you need to be prepared to explain what that means. You're contracted with me. What are the property types? So you're going to identify what they want. Single family properties in the county or Riverside, whatever. Okay. Additional buyer preferences. This is that form we're talking about, that form BIPP. I just don't see people using this form. If you think it's useful, then check the box and fill out the BI. I want a pool and it has to have this and it must have solar panels or whatever you want to do. I just don't see that one being adopted very well. Properties excluded from the property, from this representation. A buyer comes to you and says, hey, I actually do have a buyer broker agreement signed, but it's exclusive for properties in Sunnymead Ranch in Moreno Valley. So, okay, well, but only Sunnymead Ranch and Moreno Valley. And now I'm looking in Moreno Valley Ranch. Have you signed an exclusive agreement with Moreno? No. Cool. So they could up here, they could say, I only want properties in Moreno Valley Ranch and I'm working with Dwayne Sanders, and I'm excluding properties in Sunnymead Ranch because I'm working with Fernando. Okay, so whatever it happens to be. So, you got a little creative with that, but you guys get the gist of it. Okay, so we exclude certain properties. Here's the money. Okay, and again, we've got the disclosure. Commission's not fixed by law. This is what got Missouri in trouble. They didn't have language like this. We've had language like this in our contracts for 40 years. But maybe if they had language like this in disclosures in these other states, we wouldn't have this issue. So it's negotiable. How much are you agreeing to pay me? X%, X amount of dollars, 3%, $30,000, whatever it happens to be. Okay. On the listing agreement, I put a little X here. We're not using the compensation schedule. I think that's going to be the true with the buyers as well. Some of you, however, might say, Lance, I want to do a menu of services when I work with the buyer. If they want this, I'll do it for X. If they want this plus, I'll do it for X plus. If you're going to do that, bring it to me. I want to see it. And Drew wants to see it. Paul wants to see it before we do it. Hey, Jack.
Accident, sorry.
Oh, okay. No problem. Okay. So again, we're gonna hopefully you've created enough value. And I am gonna pause here. If I don't know the buyer and they just want to see a house, and some of you will be like, well, hey, that's fine. If they're not willing to sign this form and talk to my lender and get pre-qualified and give me a pint of blood, I'm not going to show them a house. If that's your business model, fine. I respect that. But that's not my business model. I will, quote unquote, waste my time for a couple of hours the first time around for that buyer. Am I going to do it the second time and the third time? No. But in the world we live in right now, especially if you're doing online leads, if you're doing Zillow leads or you're doing these other leads, and this may be honestly one reason that some agents are not interested in working on Zillow or OpCity or whatever it happens to be, because we kind of require that. That's kind of required of those leads, where you're going to at least show them a house once. You're going to burn, a half hour to 2 or 3 hours of your day showing a client, not knowing whether they're qualified, not knowing if they're willing to pay you a large amount of money. So at any rate, we got our number in there. Payments received by broker from seller or others. So now they're saying that, by the way, every time we say broker here, we're talking about the buyer's broker. So if the buyer's broker receives compensation from the seller or others, I'm not sure who others could be, for broker's representation of the buyer, the amount shall be credited against what the buyer says. So if the buyer says, I'm going to pay Lance 3%, but the seller is going to pay me 2%, then guess what? There's a 1% spread, and that's what I'm entitled to. Broker shall not receive any amount in excess. So that's the exact opposite. The contract says that the buyer's broker agreement has 1% here. The selling list the sellers offering 2, well, I can't get 2. If this says 1, I can only get 1. That would be the excess that they're referring to. Pretty simple stuff. Continue right for payment of brokers of all properties. This is the exact same language that's in the listing agreement that says if you fire me, if you cancel this agreement, and I give you a list of properties that I was involved in, whatever, if you buy that house within whatever period of days is in here, then you still owe that broker a commission. This is going to be one of those things, again, on the listing agreement, it's hardly ever done or enforced, like hardly ever. I could see this coming up. I could see this being one of those where you're working with somebody that they didn't tell you they were working with somebody else. You open up escrow, and then all of a sudden the broker comes out of the woodwork and says, hey, yeah, they did cancel, but I showed them this house and I gave them this address, and I'm entitled to a commission as well. I hope I'm wrong, but I could see that happening. So if you have this wrapped around your head when it comes to listings that cancel, this is the exact same thing. A buyer has canceled. You've shown him 4 houses. You've given him those addresses of those 4 houses, and he buys one of those houses in this period here before this 30 days or 60 days. That's what that is. So we'll see whether that materializes all right. Cancellation rights. Here we go. This is important. We talked about this earlier. Non-exclusive. Cancellation effective upon receipt. Okay. Cancellation effective upon receipt, or 5 days after receipt. The default is upon receipt. So what does that mean? If it's a non-exclusive agreement, buyer sends me an email, text message, phone call, I'm canceling, boom, done. Right? The buyer's not going to do something in writing. You, in theory, could memorialize and put it in writing. They're just going to send you an email. They said you're done. Now, if it's exclusive, cancellation, so it's a 30-day window. So we would love exclusives. On the buyer that Misty called me about for Leaper's deal, Leaper's going to hope that it's non-exclusive. Buyer can cancel immediately, and away we go. Right? Okay, so we'll see how that works out. So there's a distinction between exclusive and non-exclusive. Buyer financial and personal information, buyer to deliver. This is that form FP or BFPI. We will not be using this. What this talks about, and this is how you're going to, because your buyers are going to ask you this, okay? What this is referring to in the contract, the RPA contract, it says that the buyer needs to provide a pre-qualification letter, proof of funds, and that sort of stuff. That's the spirit of what this is about. I'm not going to pull up this form BFPI. We've talked about it previously, but I don't want you guys gathering this information. Buyers are not going to be interested in giving you this information. Having said that, when this portion of the contract comes up, you basically say what they're referring to here is your loan information and your ability to qualify for the house. You will need to provide proof of funds, release your credit report, all that sort of stuff to the lender. This is not information that I need. Okay. But my lender's going to need it. And guess what? You'll be talking to him in 2 hours. So I don't see this form BFPI being adopted at all. Okay. Other financial considerations. This is important. Buyer does not have sufficient funds to pay you. How easy is that? Or buyer intends to purchase with the following loan product, which does not allow buyer to pay compensation. When they generated this, they were going to put in here, a VA loan, but that's not true. VA has suspended that. So there is no other loan product that I'm aware of. VA would have been the one. So at the moment, this will not be checked ever. However, we've talked about this. If you've been in our meetings and in our contract colleges and in the sales meetings, well, buyer doesn't have it. So up here, they're saying, sure, I'll pay you 3%. Knock your socks off. Down here, they're saying, oh, I don't have it. So what is the buyer telling you? The truth. There's 3%, but I don't have the money. So what is that going to mean? You're going to get what you're going to get. If you can get 3% from the listing agent, great. Or from the, listing agent. There I go. If we can get 3% seller concessions that can be applied towards your commission, I'm perfectly fine to get you that. If we can't, then I don't have the money. Okay, I think we're gonna see this box checked a lot. So you guys, this is what you guys need to know these forms. As a matter of fact, in my little video, and again, who's gonna watch the video? Who's gonna read the forms? Well, the engineer types, the detail-oriented buyers, they're gonna be the ones that are gonna watch it. So you might want to sit back and say, in my little video, I add an extra 10 seconds. Oh, by the way, I fully understand that you may not have enough money for down payment and closing costs and to pay me. So when we get to that form, go to the bottom of page 1, take a look at G2. We're going to check that box that says you don't have enough money to pay me on top of your down payment and closing costs. Don't worry about that. We're going to try to negotiate this into the deal, and we're going to see if we can get the seller to take care of it. Okay, something like that. Okay, so it's all going to be in the presentation. And I think if you present it in a fashion similar to that, buyers will be more than willing to sit back and sign these forms. If you leave the impression in the buyer's mind that they have to pay you money that they don't have, they're not going to sign this form, right? Or they're going to sign this form and they're going to immediately be in a state of panic when they, they're going home and they're, oh my gosh, and why did you sign that? We can't even afford the down payment and we don't have the closing costs. And you just said you're going to pay this agent, right? So present it properly. Hey, Mercedes.
Hey, okay, so even if the buyer doesn't have the funds, they still need to fill out the percentage on the previous page that you showed?
Well, if there's nothing in here, at least unless this agreement is modified, E1 on this form, the operative compensation shows up in paragraph E1, either the percentage or here. Whatever's here is what you're going to get paid, or at least you're not going to get paid any more than that. So you have to have something. And we're going to talk more. Hold on to that question, Mercedes, because we're going to do 2 other forms, and then we're going to talk about what happened in the phone call between Art and Ed, and it ties into this. But this paragraph E1 is where you're going to put the amount of compensation that you're looking to receive in the transaction. In theory, not in theory, in fact, from the buyer. Okay. But wait a minute, Lance, the buyer doesn't have any money. They checked G2. Correct. We're going to ask for concessions from the seller. They're going to give those concessions to the buyer, and those concessions hopefully are going to coincide with the number to help pay me, and you know what, maybe pay for some escrow fees and maybe put on a new roof, whatever it happens to be. So getting that language and that verbiage correct, I think, is going to be super important. Okay, keep them going. Page 2, we're going to give them the advisories. We're going to talk about compensation. Okay, there's just a lot of additional information. Much of this we've already discussed. Is it non-exclusive? Is it exclusive? So I'm not going to go through and read this again, but understand, again, commissions are not set by law, all that sort of stuff. None of this is really new. Broker's involvement. This is defining your involvement in a property. So if you're having a dispute with a future buyer, you're like, wait a minute, you bought a house this weekend, you didn't use me, and blah, 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 blah. And the agent or the buyer turns to you and says, yeah, but you weren't involved in this property. You can almost guarantee they're probably reading from here. Did you physically show the property? Broker showed the property. Did you do it virtually? I sent them a video. Did you submit a signed offer by the buyer? Well, I think that's pretty obvious, isn't it? Did you perform a market analysis on the property? The property was introduced to the buyer by the broker or one of the buyers act on behalf. However, merely sending the buyer a list of properties should not be deemed a broker involvement. Okay. So, they're on my email list and they're on an automatic search with CRMLS. And I sent that to them and they bought it. No. That is not broker involvement. Write an offer, physically show it to them. You got to show more than that. Continuation, we talked about that. The agreement's canceled. You give them a list of the 2 properties you were involved in. If they meet the criteria, in theory, you could be, I'm going to go back. Guys, I don't anticipate this happening a lot. It hardly ever happens on listings. I don't anticipate it happening with buyers. If you think that I'm going to give everybody a bit of advice. If 6 months from now or 6 days from now, you think you're involved in one of these and your buyer has done you wrong, and you want to basically go after them for commission, when you come to me and Drew and Drake and Paul, you better bring it. You better, I mean, I'm going to okay, give it to me. What did you do? I need to convince me that you were truly involved in that property. Okay, timing of compensation again. When did this get done? How do we get paid? Generally, it's upon close of escrow, but wait a minute, the buyer defaulted. This is nothing really new about this language. Okay, upon completing a resulting transaction. So we don't get paid if escrow falls out. That's kind of what we're talking about here. How do I get paid as the buyer's broker? We're going to get paid through escrow. The buyer's going to basically irrevocably assign the concession that they received from the seller, going to consign it over to me as compensation. Same way it's done now, just a little different twist. Accounting for payments to brokers, if broker is also representing the seller. This is a double lender. How does that work if I am double lending it? Okay. And again, it's the same way we would do it now. You just got to remember, we're using this concession language. This is a concession for the buyer. The buyer can do whatever they want with that money, but they've chosen to pay you with it. Okay. Or not. Again, that'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. Payments received from others, less than buyer compensation obligation. So again, is there another source that these funds could come from? Sure. Okay. Again, we don't want to go down the rabbit hole, but sure. Disclosure of payments to broker. Broker independently or through escrow will disperse final compensation. So again, just a bunch of legal cleanup stuff, not necessarily too much crazy stuff there. Cancellation. Okay. Again, we had talked about that. It's either immediate if it's non-exclusive or upon delivery, or 30 days if it's exclusive. All right. So that'll be important. We've got an agency section in here, just like we do in a listing agreement. The agency disclosure form will populate with this form. So when they sign the buyer broker agreement, they're going to get an agency form. They're also going to get a PRBS, just like on a listing agreement. Nothing crazy there. If there are properties excluded from the representation, this is just going to identify those exclusions. Yes, I'm working with another agent in Sunnymead Ranch. I'm excluding Sunnymead Ranch. Okay. Is there potentially a conflict with other brokers? Okay. This is, again, I'm working with one broker. I'm working with another broker. I've signed agreements. One of them thinks it's canceled. The other one thinks it's not canceled. The buyer said, hey, I'm not going to get involved in that. I think you very well may have a lot of buyers that are going to want to sign non-exclusive agreements. I'm recommending we get exclusive for the obvious reasons, but I think we're going to get a lot of buyers who are going to say, yeah, I'll sign that, but I want to do the non-exclusive option. I want to cancel it whenever I want. And I get that. I totally get that. And I certainly would not tell you to die on your sword with that. There might be some buyers that you're like, okay, I'm definitely not going to spend a lot of time with you unless you sign exclusive. But there'll be others that you will. In the same way, guys, for decades, even though I've taken exclusive authorization and right to sell listing agreements, I put in there the seller can cancel anytime they want, which basically makes it a non-exclusive, or at least it gives them the ability to cancel whenever they want. So we've got some language in there. Again, this is the kind of that operative clause that says, hey, you're hiring me, now I'm going to do things for you. I'm going to represent you well. I'm going to use due diligence. I'm going to use all my best efforts. So I'm not going to go through this specifically, but I think it lays it out. Buyer's obligation. Does this look familiar? I mean, this is some very similar language. You have to act in good faith. They got to give us, information. Don't lie to me and tell me you're working with 4 different brokers. Just act in good faith. Let's work together on this. Again, financial and personal information. We talked about that before. I think the go-to on this is you're going to be providing this information to the appropriate parties, in particular, the lender. Okay, in particular, the lender. Feed the box in 2G2. What's 2G2? Got to go back. Refresh my memory. 2G2. Okay, so here we go. This is important. So they're talking about here, if either box is checked in 2G2, I don't have the money or my lender doesn't allow it, which there is none of that. So now that I've refreshed my memory. Here we go. Okay, if either the box is checked in 2G2, For any, and this is important, guys. It's funny how this kind of, to me, just kind of got buried. This needs to probably have like a bigger box around it. For any of the property of which the buyer writes an offer to purchase. A, buyer agrees to include the term in the buyer's offer requesting seller to compensate the buyer. So this is basically saying 2A says, I don't have the money. I've told you in this agreement, I'm going to give you 3%. So let's read it. Buyer agrees to include a term in the buyer's offer requesting seller to compensate buyer's broker. And I know there's an and. That's form SPBB. This says right here that the buyer is saying, I'm going to give you 3%, but I don't have it. So we're going to use SPBB and we're going to ask him for that amount. That's the trigger clause. Go ahead, Jack.
The previous page, I believe, let's see here. Where's it at? Okay. Financial personal information within a specified time, a pre-approval, pre-qualification letter.
Yep.
Now, that was pretty much what we used a long time ago. Most cases these days, we're all asking for approval letters, not pre-approval letters.
Yep.
So with that verbiage in there and that buyer signing that, does that mean we can't insist on, we want to see approval letters, not pre-qual letters?
No, I don't think that changes anything. I think it's going to be the same. My approach on this, if you were my buyer, Jack, it would be, okay, this is the deal. You know, at some point, hopefully soon, you're going to find the property that you love. We're going to write an offer on that. We want that offer to be as strong as possible. And that offer is going to basically, and that seller is going to expect that you are a qualified buyer. So before we do that, you're going to talk to Sally at Sally's Mortgage, my mortgage partner. They're going to run your credit. They're going to verify your income. They're going to verify your amount of down payment and closing costs, and basically, hopefully, get you a fully underwritten pre-approval. Okay, something to that effect. But that doesn't change that. The main thing where I think there might have been some confusion on some trainings that I saw is that this information, it appeared as though the buyer was going to be giving us all this information, and they were going to fill out a form, and they were going to give us as the agent all this information. And we don't want that information. We don't need that. So my script on this will be, this is going to be required by the lender. Before we submit your offer, we're going to need to get as much of this information, if not all of it, over to the lender so that we can get the strongest pre-approval letter as opposed to a pre-qual or whatever it happens to be, which is in effect what you're saying is we want it strong. So that's what they're looking for there. And the emphasis I was putting on this, I forget the name of that form. Javier and I talked about it. I think it's the PIPB or PIPP or something like that. And if you can visualize that form, it's just a form. It's like a loan application almost. And the buyer's filling it all out and they're signing it and they're giving it to their agent. I don't want that. We're not using that form. So, okay. So getting back here. Oh, I'm sorry, Mike, go ahead.
It's BFPI, that form you're talking about.
Correct. BFPI. We talked about it earlier. And again, there might be a situation where you may want to use that. I just don't see it. Okay, so again, this paragraph's big, so I'm going to go back because this is kind of that operative paragraph. This is going to happen a lot. You want to get paid out of concessions, okay? The buyer doesn't have the money, okay? So we come here. What you're agreeing to, buyer, is that we understand you don't have the money. You've agreed that I'm worth something. We've put that number here on the form on page 1. You're agreeing that when we write your offer, we're going to put that amount into the offer, requesting the seller to pay for that. And it's going to come in the form of concessions to you, and then you're going to use those concessions to pay me. Okay. Now, paragraph B, because it doesn't just stop there. And paragraph B, for a transaction, this agreement is contingent upon the seller or others or both agreeing to pay broker the full amount that the buyer is contractually obligated to pay the broker. With that contractually obligated, boy, you talk about transparent. Yeah, they're contractually obligated. This contingency is in favor of the broker, and the broker may elect to cancel this agreement related to representation on that specific property. Let's pause right there. I know there's a comma, but let's pause there. What this is saying is, you've told me you don't have any money. You've told me on page 1, you're going to pay me 3%. You've agreed here that we're going to ask the seller to pay that 3%. Drew is representing that seller. And Drew seller said, I ain't paying you nothing. And I kind of told you that before, but I guess I did tell you to write an offer. But Lance, you didn't even write a really good offer. It's below full price. You're asking for a whole bunch of other nonsense. So guess what? Your form SPBB, where the seller is going to basically concession to the buyer to pay your commission, is rejected. Okay. Now we already know that the buyer doesn't have the money because they already told us. You guys follow me on this? So now what? What this says is the contingency is in favor of the broker. This is the buyer's broker. The broker may elect to cancel this agreement related to the representation on that specific property if the seller does not agree to pay the full amount that the buyer is contractually obligated to pay the broker, period. So what this is basically saying is at that point in the transaction, you as the buyer's agent can fire the buyer. What do you guys think of that? Okay. You can say, now again, there's a whole bunch of other sources you can get or options. You can continue to negotiate. You can go down a variety of endless paths, but if there's no money there and the seller's not willing to pay and the buyer doesn't have it, this basically gives you as the buyer's broker the ability to basically walk away. So hold on to that. Let's finish this paragraph and then I want to come back to that in a minute. Broker shall inform the buyer, seller, and the listing agent that the buyer is proceeding without representation, and they shall complete a new agency confirmation, removing the broker from representing the buyer. Okay, remember how much we dwelled on unrepresented buyers in the listing agreement? Did anybody have a little bell that just went off in their head? Am I the only one who, the first time I read this, I'm like, oh, does anybody feel that this could be a thing? Don't think it's going to happen on every deal, but is this going to happen where the seller says, hey, yeah, your offer's great, but I ain't paying you. Buyer, I don't have any money. So is it possible that there will be buyers brokers that will either work for much less than what they originally agreed to, or if the answer is nothing, will quit? That's what this says. Okay, I know nobody's unmuting, so nobody wants to play with me on this. But just this little obscure little paragraph too, okay? It gives the buyer, quite honestly, a lot, and this is a consumer-friendly form. As again, Dwayne, I keep using Dwayne as our example, because the industry was felt not to be consumer-friendly. They have changed this to be very consumer-friendly, at least in relation to, I told you I don't have any money. I told you if you could get paid from the seller, you could get paid, but that's the house I want. I did what you asked. I wrote the offer. I asked the seller to pay for it in an SPBB. It didn't work out, but guess what? I still want that house. Well, what about, Lance, if we just say, well, forget it. Let's go buy another house. Let's go find another house that will get me paid. Buyer says, that sounds like that's in your best interest. I want this house. So this will be very, very interesting. The fact that nobody's unmuted on this, maybe I'm the only one who thinks this is going to be a big deal, but I can see, I see this coming, and I don't know that I did originally. And I guess I should have tried to put 2 and 2 together when I saw it in the listing agreement. Okay. So this is another reason, by the way, where the listing agent on these transactions will more than likely be demanding that when you submit the offer, you also are submitting the buyer broker agreement. And what's one of the things that listing broker is going to be looking for? I'm going to give you a hint here in a minute. It's going to be looking at paragraph G2, right? Because just think about the negotiation disadvantage that, or advantage, I suppose, that the seller has. I misspoke, the advantage. The offer's in, the buyer obviously loves the house. They're writing an offer on the house. The agent's asking for 3% commission or whatever they're asking for. But now the listing agent knows and the seller knows, buyer doesn't have the money. Okay, so what do you do with that? I could see a seller taking advantage of that. Saying, all right, well, we're not going to pay the agent, or we're going to pay them less. We're going to pay them half of what they asked for, and they'll be happy to get it because they're not going to be able to get anything from the buyer. You guys with me on this? This is where I think we're going. This is why I've been saying for months and months and months, buyers and buyers agents, if there's winners and losers, I think, buyers, well, in this example, actually the buyer could be a winner, but the buyer's agent ultimately could be a loser. Well, Lance, come on, man, we're in this for the buy. Yesterday we did the IVAR thing, and this is true. I don't mean to minimize this. We want to represent our clients. We want to do a good job for our clients. It's not all about the money, okay? But we don't work for free either. So at some point, our interests need to align. But at any rate, it will be very interesting to see how this shakes out. Hey, Jack, go ahead.
I don't remember on the listing agreement, but isn't there a place there that you ask your seller right up front if he's willing to pay concessions and or offer a commission to the other agent if they sell the house?
Well, well, yes and no. There's zero reference to the seller paying commission. There is an option under the MLSA, paragraph 5, that we talked about an hour and a half ago.
Right.
That says the seller is willing to offer concessions.
Not will, he is willing.
What will consider.
We'll consider, there you go. That was the word used. Okay. So is it possible that we can ask or does the listing agent have to disclose to us that is in his listing agreement?
No. And again, this is on tape, and I'm not picking on you, Jack, because it's very easy.
No, it's fine. It's
super easy to miss this. This is why you guys need to get in more than one of these and listen to the tape, because we mentioned this, but it's just easy. I mean, you're thinking about one thing, and then I say something else, and you miss the second thing. So you've got the willingness, but this is the thing. Even in the MLS, we have the box in there. Is seller willing to consider concessions? It's a yes, no, but it's not a mandatory field. So the agent can ignore it. And you on the buy side looking at that listing, you'll have no idea, just because if it says yes, okay, well, now you know. If it says no, it's like, oh, okay, well, they're telling me they don't want to negotiate it. But it could just be blank. So you could make phone calls or you could just write it up. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. Okay. So this is the deal. I'm going to go past 2 o'clock. I don't know if I'm going to lose any of you, but I want to keep this video together. This is all being recorded. It'll be on our YouTube channel. It doesn't make sense for me to stop. So I'm probably going to go for about another 15 to 30 minutes, depending upon how long it takes me. We're getting close though. But I'm telling you, go back. Paragraph 9B2. Okay. You guys need to understand this paragraph. Okay, you really, really need to understand this paragraph. So if it's a little fuzzy, then paragraph 9B2 on the BRCC, you need to really understand this. Okay, reasonable care and professional assistance. Yes, we have to, excuse me, this is on the buyer. The buyer is obligated. Yes, I'm going to read. I'm going to understand. I'm going to seek the appropriate professional advice. The buyer's responsibilities there. Again, reports, yes, you're going to get an opportunity to look at reports. You may have to pay for them. Any material issues, you need to let us know. Is there something important that we need to know? If so, you please need to let us know if something has changed. Incorrect, incomplete, or inaccurate information. If you've given us something bad, you're going to hold us harmless. You forgot to tell us that you are going to prison tomorrow. I don't know, whatever, something, you're married or you're divorced or whatever it happens to be. Standard attorney fees clause, same one we've always done. Standard management approval clause, same one that's in all of our agreements. There's a mediation arbitration clause built in here. We're familiar with those. Authorized signers, this could be entity signer, whatever it happens to be. So same stuff we're familiar with. the entire agreement, we made it. Now, this is a 5-page form that I've been calling a 4-page form because the 5th page is, oh, actually, that's the other page. I apologize. This is a 5-page form. So, but this is the entire agreement. Then we've got our nice little exclusive representation of what it means. Okay. Is this exclusive? If it is exclusive, this is what it means. The buyer has to initial on that. So when you go back to page 1 and you check that little box, okay, you're not going to slip that by the buyer by checking the little box. Not that nobody, of course, would never do that here, but the buyer also now needs to initial that it's an exclusive representation. Guess what else they need to do? The dollar amount that we put back on page 1, we're going to put it in again, okay? Confirming it. So you're going to put the compensation in 2 places. So if they didn't really see it on page 1, right above their signature line, we're going to put it in again, okay? Then we get to the signature block. So is it an entity buyer? This is just like all the other signature blocks. And then you get the bottom signature piece. Okay, so that's we'll call this the granddaddy gold standard buyer's representation agreement. 5 pages, covers everything you could possibly want to cover. I am told this is one of the forms that they're currently revising. And did you guys hear this correctly? I believe Art Carter said they're going to turn this into a 4-page form.
Correct.
Right. Okay. So, they're taking a lot out. So we'll see. They've been getting a lot of pushback on simplify. So they went from 5 to 4. Okay. Now I mentioned to several of you that I like this form. I like the property showing one. I think this is a good, an easier first step. And yes, full disclosure. Why do I like it? Because it's really a 3-page, but technically, I mean, it's technically a 3-page, but it's really a 2-page form. That's why I like it. I like it because it's simpler. And I think today simpler is better. So this will be very easy to go through. It's everything that the other form has, except in the light version. In this case, it's a maximum of 3 properties, period. Okay. It's not Moreno Valley Ranch. It's 3 properties. Doesn't have to be 3, but 3. Okay. What else have you got here? Here's my period. The other one is 90 days. This one is no more than 30 days. Okay. So if that's the problem for you, then there you go. So, dollar amount gets plugged in. That part is basically the same. Okay. The cancellation right is immediate or 3 days, 5 days, whatever it happens to be. All right. So this, again, same rules as those non-exclusive. Other terms would be blank. Compensation to the brokers, basically the same stuff we just reviewed. Okay. Kind of goes through what the compensation looks like, what's involved. It's a non-exclusive agreement, whatever it happens to be. So we already covered that. Get to top of page 2. What's the timing? Same stuff we already talked about. Okay. Same stuff we already talked about. Property has to result in a close of escrow, et cetera, et cetera. Payment through escrow. Same paragraph we just talked about. Accounting for payments for brokers also representing the seller. Same paragraph that's in the BRCC. Payments received from others less than prospective compensation. Same paragraph. So it's taking the other one. It's just tightening it up a little bit. How do we cancel the agreement? Either prospective buyer or broker may cancel this agreement by giving written notice to the other within the time specified in paragraph 4C. What's 4C? Let's go back. It's important. Let's go back to 4C again. 4C, cancellation rights, effective upon receipt. As soon as I give it to him, I email it to Mike Slay, I'm canceling it. Boom, done. Unless I said 5 days after receipt. So the default is upon receipt. So this basically can be canceled. I would imagine it's most of the time it's going to be upon receipt. And I don't think we're going to get a lot of boxes checked. Very simple. Agency stuff, we've already covered that. We understand that. What's our obligation? We're to use due diligence. Prospective buyers operate this prospective buyer's obligation, act in good faith. Just a very shorter version of what we talked about. prospective buyers attending open houses without representation, just talks about it. Oh, look at this. You are not required to sign a representation agreement to see a property at an open house. Wait a minute, Lance, I thought I had to sign in. That's not a representation agreement. That's the exact opposite. That's an agreement that says we're not representing you. Well, look at this. If you do not want the agent holding the open house to represent you, then you should not sign this form. And you should read and understand the open house form, sign this one. So what they're saying here is don't sign the representation, don't sign this form, sign this form. Okay? You guys understand that? So the context they're giving is if I'm a listing agent at an open house and I'm holding an open house and I put this form in front of the buyer, this tells the buyer, if you don't want this guy to represent you, don't sign this one. Just go ahead and sign the open house form. Okay, I think it's pretty reasonable. All prospective buyers, if you already signed the representation agreement with another broker, you need to inform the broker. Let them know that. Let them know what the obligation is so you're not committed to pay 2 commissions. Okay, so that's the end of the form. Page 3 is the signature block. Okay, so it's very simple. You know, very similar to the other, but they've just watered it down, and the main differences are 30 days and 3 properties. Okay. All right. So that is that one. Okay. Now we may have a little controversy on this. I'm being told, and I don't agree with this. And if I did agree with it, I wouldn't share this with you, but actually I would share it with you because you need to be aware that this is out there. Okay. Zillow's, I don't know why these images aren't rendering. There's supposed to be a picture of a touring agreement in here. Hey, Jack, go ahead.
On that document, the 3 properties that are listed.
Yep.
Did I miss something there, or is that I have 30 days to show those 3 properties, or I can amend this form and add as many properties necessary within that 30-day period?
Well, no. You would create a new form or you would amend it. This basically says, hey, Jack, you and I are going to go out this weekend with Patty, and I'm going to show you these 3 houses. This is the property showing and representation. So it assumes I'm going to show you these 3 houses today. Now, if you buy any of those 3 houses, our agreement's basically a 30-day window. Or in theory, I could show you this one today and this one tomorrow, and then another one 30 days from now. So, but if you're going to show multiple properties and you go past 3, you in theory, well, not in theory, you in fact would have to create a new form. You would do a new form and add the 5th property and the 6th property.
So a new property showing and a representation agreement, not an amendment.
You could do an amendment, but I think it would be just as easy to do a new one. You could amend it, I suppose. But I'm suggesting best practice would be to do a brand new one.
All right.
Yep. Hey, Herman.
Yes, I've been out with clients and they want to see a property we just drove by. It's not on the list. And so I think this is just really limiting my choices bigly, to use the word here. And is there a way to create a form that extends the amount of properties indefinitely to you don't have to go through this form each time once you go past 3 properties, which are utterly ridiculous.
Correct. Yeah, and the answer is yes, and it's the previous form that we just looked at. It's the BRBC.
Yeah, but that's I want to avoid that 5-page form because that's really a little bit overwhelming for some buyers. You have to remember, not all buyers can read 5 pages in one day. Most of them will read maybe 10% of it.
Correct.
So that's a challenge because you have attention deficit, you know.
Trust me, I deal with it all day long, 100%. But yeah, you're 100% correct. And this is why some brokers are refusing to use these forms. There are brokers. It's funny. There's a broker who actually sits on the standard forms committee who was responsible to review, and ultimately it came out of his committee. And he's a big broker. I've known him for years. He's not using these forms. He hates them. And he was on the committee that helped create them. Obviously, he was outvoted. So, but yeah, you would, if this form was too cumbersome in the fact that it doesn't cover a broad enough property base, then you would want to use the 5-page form, which has its own challenges because it's 5 pages and cumbersome.
So. Showing commercial property, does this apply to commercial?
Yeah, it actually does, but I gotta tell you, I don't know that there's gonna be the enforcement on this. And this is why, because this has to do with like the MLSs, but most of the commercial properties are done so differently. But if there's a property that's a commercial property and it's put inside of CRMLS, then the answer is yes, this applies. But I really think commercial, I'd be interested to see like the real, not that you guys aren't real, because I know you do some commercial stuff, Herman, but like what are the Grubb Analysis doing with this, and what's Lee and Associates doing? I first of all, you guys know they don't use these forms anyway. They've got their own forms, and they do it differently. Quite honestly, it's funny. Ed Zorn was a commercial real estate broker with Coldwell Banker. Ed Zorn, the attorney for CR for a decade or two. And it's funny because he just says, hey, we're going to do it like the commercial guys have done it for the last 50 years, which is they negotiate their commissions as part of the transaction on every deal. And it's negotiated on every deal. So he uses commercial in that capacity. So, okay, let's get rolling. I want to show you guys another. Oh, hey, Lydia, what do you got? Quickly. Oh, geez, I got 5 questions. Okay, quickly, I'm not going to move quickly. Okay, then you and Javier, and then Stacy. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I had a past buyer, and he occasionally, which I always have done, and I the other day I didn't fill it out. He emailed me a property. He's elderly man, so he asked me if I could go to the property, and I went to the property. I didn't fill that out, and I did a little FaceTime with him to see if he liked it, because he was a past client of mine.
Cut
I
to it.
didn't fill it out.
Give us the facts. What do you got? So you did a video.
No, I didn't do. Yeah, I did a FaceTime. I went to the property and I called him up and I did a FaceTime inside the house. Okay, I didn't fill this out though.
Right,
Do
you
I
should.
have to?
Yes, you have to show the one of the rules now is these forms need to be, you have to have a buyer agreement in some form now. Now, the fact that you didn't do that,
Even though it's periodically.
you have to have a buyer broker agreement to show properties. This is an MLS rule. Now, again, I have all sorts of heartburn with this. The settlement says one thing, the MLS says another thing, but this is the new reality for us guys. The new reality is before I'm showing an agent, before I'm showing a buyer, we need to have this discussion. They need to execute something, the BRBC, this form, or maybe something else I'm going to share with you in a minute. This is going to be very new for a lot of you. A lot of you will struggle with this. Now, if you haven't done this, don't worry about it. Yeah, I think probably 10% of the agents have actually complied with this yet, but you need to get ready now. Stacy, what you got?
Oh, I was just wondering, so for example, I get a lot of Zillow leads that want to buy land or a residential home. So would I draw up 2 agreements with the same buyer, or would I do an addendum, like if they buy land, the commission will be X amount, and if it's a single family, it'll be X amount?
Oh, well, yeah, you could. You could do 2 agreements. It's funny because I've been saying that, was talked about that other form about oh my gosh, hold on a minute. I'm drawing blank. I told you guys not to do this, but Stacy just gave us the example where you would want to do it. And that is, hold on a minute, compensation. So if you want to have that, hey, if I'm selling you residential, you're going to check this box. Residential, my compensation is X. If I'm selling you vacant land, my compensation is Y. If I'm selling you commercial, so if you had 2 or 3 different things, then this is where that compensation schedule would apply. That makes perfect sense to me, your example. Okay. Javier, what you got?
Lance, let's say I meet a buyer and I sign a property showing in the representation agreement, good for 3 properties, correct? Or 30 days?
3 properties, 30 days. Yep.
2 weeks into that, let's say we open escrow.
Yep.
What happens if that representation period expires prior to the close of that escrow?
Well, Oh, then that's not a problem. That would be the same thing as if your listing agreement expired prior to close of escrow. That happens every day. You put them under contract. Once you're under contract, now the commission is locked in for the contract.
And there's no need to extend the representation period, correct?
Correct, because you now have an actual agency established with them in the same way that you would not have to extend a listing agreement that expires during an escrow period. You don't have to do that. Now, if the escrow falls out, you better extend that listing, because then you got a problem. Or if this buyer's escrow falls out, you better go and extend and reestablish that relationship. But if it expires during a escrow, you're fine.
Thank you.
No need to do anything. Okay, so let me throw a couple other little curveballs at you. Now, I'm presenting this because I like it. I'm getting pushback from a couple different areas, so I'm just going to acknowledge that right now. Zillow came out with this form. I think there's going to be a variety of other companies that are going to come out with this form. This is a form that they put out a month or two ago, and they immediately pulled it back because somebody, I don't know if it was CAR or Attorney General of California, I don't know who it was, but somebody said, don't use that. So they pulled it back. And anyway, they reintroduced this form last Friday. I actually like this form. There's some people that I respect that they hate it. They're like, I can't believe you like it, Lance. I think this is a very nice form for certain buyers, specifically buyers that have zero relationship with you. They don't know you. You just have no relationship. For example, since this is a Zillow form, how about a buyer from Zillow that says, would you please show me 123 Main Street? To Herman's point, if I sit down and say, because by the way, they're supposed to sign these forms before you show them the house. So I've never met them. They just called me off the internet. And I'm going to show them this house. Oh, but by the way, would you please read, sign, and agree to pay me this commission on this 5-page document before I meet you at the house? Now, you think it's hard to get people to sign a sign-in sheet at an open house? I'm thinking this might be difficult. Okay. So Zillow came up with this form. I like this form. At the moment, I am not only endorsing this form for Zillow tours, I'm endorsing this form for all tours. Okay. As a stepping stone. I want to be very clear. This will not be the final agreement, and you're going to realize that why in a minute. But I think it's a very good stepping stone that says, hey, I'll tell you what, in order to be compliant, I'm going to send you over this touring agreement. I need you to execute this. And then we'll talk a little bit more about what this means when I meet you at the property. Oh, by the way, I'm going to send you a video that explains it in detail. Oh, and just also understand that if we do work together and you ultimately buy a house from me, then we're going to replace this form with a different form, which is the ones we just went through. So that's a little bit of a long wind up. So what does this do? It's a touring agreement. Okay. It's between buyer, Coldwell Banker. Sole purposes is what? Consult with buyer regarding specific properties. It's not limited to 3. Okay. I'm going to go look at the house. In connection with providing the tour service, broker shall adhere to any non-waivable duties. In other words, I can't break the real estate licensing laws. I got to be honest. Buyer and broker agree that it's non-exclusive. It's very non-threatening. Again, I'm keep bringing up Dwayne because it was such a good point he made after the sales meeting. We get into these conversations and it's very easy to lose focus on the client. Okay. Doing a non-exclusive agreement with a client that you've never met and doesn't know you as a stepping stone to establish a relationship seems very reasonable to me. So this is non-exclusive. Okay. Buyer's acknowledgement. Buyer represents that buyer has not signed an exclusive agreement. So we're saying right now, hey, we just want to make sure if you have an exclusive agreement with somebody else, I don't want to violate that. This agreement is limited to 7 days. This is just, hey, we're just going to get to know each other. Now, this is the part that some of you guys might not like. You don't have to pay me. You don't have to pay me. But again, for touring services, I'm going to show you, oh, Lance, I don't work for free and I'm not an Uber driver. I got all that. I don't know the client. I'm trying to establish a relationship. So you're basically saying, I'm going to tour you around. And you don't have to pay me. Okay. I shall not receive compensation, blah, blah. So that's the key. But there's also another important part in here. For clarity, this shall not constitute or mean the parties can't enter into a subsequent agreement for compensation for additional services. So this is the setup right here that says, hey, this is the deal. And again, I'll just use Zillow as an example. I know a couple of you guys are getting Zillow leads. I see Stacy telling, yeah, Stacy Guevara is here. Okay. So by the way, Stacy, Chris might want to do something different. So consult with Chris on this, but I'll just, Stacy get Zillow leads. So I'll use Stacy as an example. Stacy goes out and shows this buyer. The buyer signs this form. It's a very easy, it's non-threatening. Okay. Stacy basically says, I'm going to show you this house for free. But this also says, if we're going to step further, we're going to replace this agreement with a different agreement. What are we going to replace it with? We're going to replace it with the BRCC or the SP, whatever. Okay. So I like this form, and it says a little bit more, but that's just it. It's one page. It's nice and clean, 4 paragraphs, equal housing opportunity. You sign it and away you go. Okay. I see a few people unmuted. Dwayne, go first.
Yeah, real quick. Why doesn't some of your colleagues not like this one?
Well, first of all, I disagree. Some of the colleagues don't like, well, I'll give you all the reasons. Some of them don't like it because everyone's hung up on exclusive. Okay. Hey, I don't know this. If I list somebody's house, yeah, I want an exclusive. I don't want to list with 5 different brokers, but a buyer that I don't know, or let's suppose, hey, this is a buyer I've done business with. I sold them 5 houses. They know me. Hey, we're going to sign an exclusive agreement, but a buyer I don't know, I think exclusive is just fine. I have no problem with that at all. Some people don't. The other part is the 7 days. Oh, it's only 7 days. There's some people that don't like the shorter version of the buyer broker agreement because it's limited to 30 instead of 90. Well, this is limited to 7. Okay, well, what am I doing? I'm establishing a relationship. I'm getting to know this client. And by the way, they might not like me. And if they don't, then guess what? See ya. And that's on me. Okay. Now, part of the problem is because there's no compensation, and on this is wrong. I disagree with this. The settlement agreement says you have to establish compensation before you show a house. Okay. I think the people who are interpreting that wrong. I am establishing compensation, and I'm agreeing that the compensation is 0 to show this house. So some people are interpreting it because it doesn't say 3%, 2%, 1%, that it doesn't work. And I'm like, well, I think it's clear, crystal clear. There's no compensation for the touring services, which we shall define as showing you this house, which, by the way, when was the last time you guys got paid to show a house? Right? We don't get paid for showing houses. We get paid for writing contracts and opening escrows. So yes, we're doing what we've done anyway. We generally will show a house for free. Some of you may not. Some of you may be hardcore. I don't do anything without a contract and a full-blown pre-approval. And if that's you, God bless you. But that's not most of the industry. But to me, it's very clear. For clarity, it even uses the word clarity. Should not be construed to mean that the parties can't enter into a substitute agreement. So I would tell my client, and by the way, Dwayne, that's the answer to your question. They don't want to use a form other than the 2 CAR forms. Now, this form happens to be a Zillow form, but I'm telling you, there's going to be hundreds of these forms out there that are drafted by different companies. And there's probably going to be 1 or 2 that are going to be better than this one. And we may say, hey, guess what? Guess we're going to use this one instead. EXP is coming out with some interesting forms. I like them a lot. EXP honestly has been really the only brokerage who seems to have done anything worth looking at. Even Coldwell Banker seems to be taking a back seat and doesn't seem interested in drafting any forms. So, okay, Jack, go for it.
I just wanted to put my 2 cents in on the form.
Yep.
I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. We all have our clients. We all show properties. We do not get paid unless we close an escrow. But I don't think I would ever enter into a non-exclusive contract with any buyer such as this one. And thirdly, I would think that this form here is amendable. If I wanted to on item 3, duration of the agreement, I can change that date and have them initial and sign the document. And it would make it legal.
Yeah, you could, but keep in mind though, this is Zillow's forms. If you're
Right.
getting Zillow leads, Zillow says this is what you're gonna do, but you're correct. You could put this in a Word document, slap a Coldwell Banker logo and do it, make it do anything you want. Correct. Yep.
Right. So, but I'm just saying that over the years, I don't play taxi service anymore to anyone unless I'm about 90% sure I'm going to be selling these people a house. And these days I only work on referrals, so I'm not out,
Yep.
pounding the dirt and looking for people. But this form here, just like I said, my 2 cents is I would not go with any non-exclusive form to show properties to anybody. I would want some sort of a commitment and show these buyers that, hey, you know what? Jack's working hard from you. You need to make a commitment to him as well. He's not your taxi driver, and he's not going to leave it wide open for you to walk away anytime you want.
But Jack, they have to see that. Jack, they have to see that commitment first, and this gives them that chance to do that.
It does.
The commitment from you.
Yep.
Well, I've been around a long time, and I no longer give them. It's either a commitment or they can go find another agent.
Yeah, well, let me, and I think you're both right, but let me see if I can connect and get some common ground. So what I would envision with this, and Dwayne, I think you would agree with this as well, is some version of this is, again, Jack, you and I don't know each other. You're my buyer. You've come to me through Zillow or online, or you walked into the office. Hey, you want to see 123 Main Street? That's fantastic. In order for us to be compliant with the new settlement, you may be aware of it. I need you to execute this form. There's no cost. It's non-exclusive. But this will at least allow me to meet you up at 123 Main Street. We can have a chat. I'll bring a couple bottles of water. We can walk around the property. And if it's something you like, that's wonderful. However, after we have that initial meeting, if you decide to move forward with this property, or you'd like to see subsequent additional properties tomorrow or over the weekend, I'm going to need to replace this form. And I'll tell you what, I'll send you a little link and you'll have a couple of samples of the other form. And if you refer to paragraph 4B, where it says for clarity, the subsequent agreement is send you what that subsequent agreement can look like. But this is the deal. I'll meet you at the house. If you like me and I like you and you decide to move forward, then we can discuss the second agreement. But if we don't hit it off, or if you're just not interested at all after you see the property, then we can call it a day. Something to that effect. I am not recommending that you guys run around with buyers long-term on an agreement like this. I'm actually the exact opposite. I think this form needs to be given, and immediately, and I mean immediately, they need to understand that if you like me, we're going to replace this with a subsequent agreement. So, okay, so let's keep going. We're close, guys. We're close. So this is the end of that form. This is the cancellation form. So this would be, hey, we want to cancel that buyer broker agreement. We've already talked about this as far as if it's whether it's non-exclusive, the cancellation period. If it is exclusive, you've got that 30-day window. So I'm not going to really go. It's only a one-page form, but there is a form to officially do the cancellation. This generally, I think, is going to be signed if you, as the agent, are canceling the buyer. If the buyer wants to cancel you, I think what they're going to do is they're just going to send you an email or a text message, and that's going to suffice. We will accept that as cancellation on a non-exclusive. So, and that's the form. I'm not going to go any further on it. I'm not going to go through the agent acknowledgement. It doesn't really change much. When we get into regular contract college, once again, we'll go back through the additional agent acknowledgement. So we'll just go through the additional broker acknowledgement again. When we get back into a normal traditional contract college, we'll go back through that again. We're almost done, by the way, guys. We're just, everything here is just cleanup. We just wanted to make sure everyone was clear that the cooperating broker compensation agreement is gone. It's been removed from the library. So never to be seen again. So if you're thinking about that, just remember the CBC has been retired. And then also this, if you guys remember this form for a minute, the ABCD form, which I just hated, this form has been removed. So there is no more ABCD form. Okay, so for now, guess what? We did it. Okay. So there's obviously going to be a few more changes, a couple other items that we're going to tweak. We already know we have at least one form change. The big one, the PRCC is going to be amended down to 4 pages instead of 5. And I think that's coming quick. So we'll take a couple last minute comments or questions and we're going to call it a day. I think you were first. Actually, Mike, why don't you go and then Jack?
Do you want to tell everyone what the new fines from the MLS is going to be?
Well, Mike, why don't you bring the joy and the good news to everybody on the fining
Well, they
system?
should think about it. I mean, that's all. I mean,
No.
$2,500, $2,500, and
Yep.
they said that there are no warnings. I mean, they're gonna go fine you immediately without warning, without giving you warning or a
Yep.
second chance.
Yep. You guys
Ouch.
you get the no warning part? Now tell me if I think I heard this, I heard that exactly what you said, but on the no warning, this is why they're going to give you no warning. Okay. And what they're specifically talking about is an MLS violation. So you put a commission thing in, or you put something in the comments, or you do whatever. The reason that they're giving you no warning on the actual fine is because they feel the system will give you a lot of warning. So if you try to put something in the public comments, if you use the word percent or you do this, apparently they've got some AI that's going to say, hey, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. And they feel it's enough. And quite honestly, I think they feel that we've been talking about it enough that everyone's going to be good. But I actually missed this part, Mike. Drew was telling me about it. He was saying on the CRMLS training, even though they had like 2,000 people today and they did another one, because they know who attends the class, because you have to put in your email and your MLS login ID. Apparently 15% of the agents that are members of the MLS has actually taken the class. So it's going to be fun. Okay. Jack, you were next, and then Sherry, and then Javier.
Yeah, I
Okay.
was just, oh, go ahead, Jack.
I'm sorry, you're welcome to start.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, comment on the fines this morning. That they had said that they were gonna be $2,500 and they will go up to $7,000. And they weren't going to give any warnings because they've been
Yep.
telling us and warning us, and we've been going over this for months and months and months now.
Yeah,
So
and
I
just
just-
for the record, I'm not paying them. So
Yeah, I'd like to know what the 7,000, they didn't say reference or say what it was, but I'm just curious, the $7,000. So I could
Yeah,
look
but-
out not to get that one.
I don't know why I'm
I don't
smiling.
want any of them.
I should be crying right now. Yeah, it's tough. It's going to be tough. I think they're going to say it's a second violation or whatever. They had a story that they told about some agent took like an aerial shot. This was a different MLS, had like a drone shot of the house, and in the lawn had big, beautiful green grass or whatever. And in the lawn, they took like the lawnmower and they carved a 3% in the lawn. They took an aerial shot, put that photo on the MLS, and they're not playing games with that. You know, I made a comment in yesterday's thing at IBAR, and you guys are seeing it too. Do not do this. But there's a lot of people posting stuff on Facebook that they think is funny. You know, they open up a lockbox and there's a key, and a key tag says 3% commission, and don't do that, guys. That's the type of stuff that's really going to cause problems for us. So at any rate, yeah, big fines. All right, Jack and Javier, and then I think we'll call it a day.
All right, just to touch bases on that subject there about the fines. They are giving classes within the next week on that particular subject, how the penalties are going to work and stuff. So I have signed up for it. I will be watching it. I think it's tomorrow for me. Anyway, so if you didn't get the memo out there, they are offering it up.
Correct.
Lance, is it possible to go back to the RLA page 1?
Sure. Sure. Okay. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm not gonna pull it up in the Canva. I've got all these forms here. Okay, RLA, page 1.
Compensation.
I'm almost there. 1 page. There we go. Okay, page 1.
All right, so C2.
Yep.
If buyer is unrepresented, there's a percentage or dollar amount or whatever that can be placed there that a seller is willing to pay additionally. I believe you explained that to us that, hey, Jack, I believe you're going to be doing extra work, so I'm going to throw in an extra dollar amount on that line.
Correct. To the listing broker.
To the listing broker.
Because
Okay.
the listing broker is now going to have additional responsibility, additional work, additional liability.
Correct.
So you're
Correct.
gonna be compensated for that. Yep.
Now, my question is in the past on our contracts, any additional fees over and above the commission have to be earned. And that brings up a question to me is how do we justify earning that money? What exactly do we, does that fall into play here with the MLS that, hey, you're charging that money, but you didn't earn it all? How
Well, yeah,
are we going to justify that?
Well, you're justifying it right now because you are in an escrow representing the seller where the buyer is unrepresented. And that's what you're earning the extra money for because that buyer is unrepresented.
But what are we doing to earn that money?
You are facilitating a smooth transaction with an unrepresented buyer. Now, let's suppose, but this is true of any transaction. Let's suppose that this unrepresented buyer is a rock star. And we close escrow and you're like, good Lord, this guy represented himself better than any agent ever could have represented him. I had to do nothing extra. As a matter of fact, not only did I have to do nothing extra, it was the smoothest transaction I've ever had. You still earned it. In my opinion, you still earned it. Number one, because we've identified the possibility of that. And I mean, maybe this will be easier for you to wrap your head around. We've earned it because we've taken on additional liability. And we deem that liability to be worth 1% additional compensation.
If we're not representing the buyer, where's the liability?
Because it's the same, we don't represent the seller on a for sale by owner. I'll tell you where the liability is. I can guarantee you when our errors and omission insurance renewal comes in, it will be increased, and it will be increased because of the way the commissions are being handled and and potentially unrepresented. So if you have a concern with that, maybe I'm not articulating a good counter argument. All I will tell you is I am extremely comfortable with it. CAR, legal counsel, is extremely comfortable with it. Maybe they do a better job explaining it, but I haven't had anybody indicate there'd be a problem showing that this additional amount was earned. So it is a legitimate question, though. You are correct. You're not allowed to take compensation for unearned efforts. So I guess we're just agreeing that being in a transaction with an unrepresented buyer is worth something to the listing agent. And by the way,
I'm sorry.
No, give an example.
Give an example if I'm sitting in front of a seller and that paragraph comes up.
Okay, this is the deal. You're going to have a buyer. This buyer is going to be required to produce certain documents for us. They're going to be required to sign disclosures. They're going to be required to do all these sort of things that any other agent, maybe they're going to be looking for termite inspections and home inspections and all these sort of inspections. And they're unlicensed, and those appointments will need to be coordinated. Those appointments will need to be scheduled. Those documents will need to be handled. They very well may need help on not so much completing a form, but I don't want to say understanding, because that implies that we're going to create an agency and explain it.
Right. Yes.
But they're going to need potentially some assistance. If for no other part, guess I'm going to be talking to them. They're going to have to call me. I
think that's the main thing. You are available for whatever's needed.
Yeah, correct. Correct. So maybe I'm not coming up with the best example. So I'll tell you what, I'll do better. I will get some CAR opinion on that and see if there's a better way to articulate what that value is. But in layman, again, if you were my seller, and again, maybe you would not buy this argument because apparently you're not buying it from me right now. But I would say, hey, Jack, this is the deal. You agreed to pay me this up here. I don't think this is going to happen. We are in unknown territory, but it's possible that we're going to have an unrepresented buyer. Let me explain to you. That's the equivalent of a for sale by owner on the buy side. I've done several for sale by owners in my career. They are very, very difficult. They are very taxing. And I feel like I'm exposing myself and my brokerage to additional liability. Because of that, I'm going to ask that you're going to compensate me an additional 1%. Now, you may not buy that, or you may think that's too much, or you may say, you know what, let's see if and when that happens. I get all that, but that would be the argument. And I will tell you, for me, I've told you guys, and I still believe this, there's winners and losers in this. I think sellers are winners. I think listing agents that are strong are winners. I think buyers agents and frankly, brokerages, are losers. I do believe brokers' commission will be less. Did you guys see this email? Since we're going long, I mean, what the heck, we might as well go even longer. Do you guys get Inman? You should be getting Inman if you're not getting Inman. There's an email, I think it was yesterday. And I don't know who these people are, but man, oh man, they don't like us. Yeah. Bear with me. You see this one? Can you guys see my screen? Did I lose you guys?
Yes.
Okay.
Consumer Watchdog advises buyers to pay agents 2% or less.
Yes, correct. Okay, this is just one group, but this group has the ear of our industry. So again, I think buyers, agents, compensation wise will be losers. I genuinely believe that this is not good for buyers in general, whether they're minority buyers or whether, well, VA seems to have said, hey, we're going to be fine. But I think buyers get hurt with this arrangement, which is so ironic because in theory, this whole lawsuit and everything is designed to help the consumer. And I don't know, I guess time will tell, but I don't know that this does ultimately, I think it helps sellers. I don't know that it helps buyers on balance. So I guess we're going to find out. Okay, Lydia, take us home. Last question.
Okay, just last thing, because this is actually going to be happening on this listing that I'm about to take.
Okay.
My neighbor had already, he's my neighbor, and he's already expressed to me the moment I have a listing at this certain area, he wants to buy it, right? Okay, I do, and I'm about to put it up. My seller does not want me to tell nobody about this listing for whatever her reason is, but I will tell my neighbor, because he wants to buy. So I'm going to go back to referring to the first page where it says the compensation and the non-compensation. So I guess I'm kind of confused because
Yeah. Let's talk offline on that because I'm confused because you have a seller who doesn't want you to tell anybody that her house is for sale. So
no. Now I'm sorry. I misspoke. My neighbor, I know that would want to buy that house. So when I tell my neighbor about a house being sold where he wants to be sold, he's going to want to buy it. So
Okay.
My question is that on that particular first page where I had already, I'm going to list it, I'm going to put 3%. 2%. And so then I go to the non-representative buyer, and that would be me.
Well,
And
no. Well, it
there.
depends. If your neighbor's a buyer and that buyer is willing to pay you a commission, and if ultimately the house that you have is going to pay a commission, then you're gonna deal with that, and you're gonna deal with that in the form of of a concession from your seller to the buyer, whatever the dollar amount is, and you're just gonna negotiate, just like any other deal. Now
So
this might be a
I
little unique because maybe it's
2%. I mean, that's the type of
Uh,
thing.
we can talk percentages all day. I don't even want to have that conversation because some
I'm
of you
sorry.
guys are charging more and some of you are charging less. And I think price is a consideration. There's all sorts of considerations when it comes to that. So, but
I just don't get it. I'm sorry.
even if it's, well, let me say this and then we'll close it with this. It sounds like maybe you have like a little bit of an off-market situation going on here where maybe the house isn't quite ready to list, or maybe it's a coming soon. I
Yes.
don't know that this is going to change that. It's more or less going to be the same consideration. It might look a little different because maybe the house isn't even in the MLS yet, but you're going to need to get a buyer broker agreement, and you're going to need to get a compensation arrangement, listing agreement from the seller. And then you're going to negotiate it in a very similar fashion. So, hey, Javier, looks like you've been trying to jump in. I'll give you the last word.
Thank you. Just quick question. Okay, so on that scenario where there was no compensation to the buyer's agent, and so the buyer's agent can announce that the buyer is going to proceed without representation, can that buyer still buy that property?
You can. Okay,
And
you're going back about an hour ago,
all right,
correct?
no, I started thinking about it. So,
Yep. Yep, they can.
so we submit an offer,
Yep.
no agreement to pay or compensation. Then we said, all right, well, this buyer is going to proceed without representation. They can still buy that property. So what happens to our buyer representation agreement with that buyer? Do we cancel? Does that stay in place?
Well, the example that I gave earlier was the example where it says the buyer agreed on the buyer broker agreement to pay a 3% commission to Javier. But they also checked that box, and they checked the box that says, but I don't have the money. Okay. And because they didn't have the money, then that triggered that other paragraph, which says, well, if they don't have the money, and if the seller is unwilling to offer compensation or concession to allow that money to be basically used to pay the Javier as the buyer's broker, then the buyer can cancel the agreement with you, Javier, with the buyer's agent. But they can still proceed to purchase the house. And again, not that you guys know I've been saying this. I'm still a board of directors member of CAR, and I generally love CNR, but you've heard me say some less than flattering things about CAR, the way this has been presented. They've really, really, really messed this up. But this next thing I'm going to say is also, it's not flattering. Not only did they mess it up, I think they've actually been deceitful. And what I mean by that is, when I've been on so many, I'm going to share my screen one last time. And I know, guys, we're going almost 3 hours, and this is truly going to have to be the last question because I'm going to have to get. So when the part that I think they've been a little deceitful, then I don't like that, is when this residential listing agreement first came up, I addressed this unrepresented buyer. Matter of fact, even in the sales meeting, I didn't know what it was. I thought it was a double ender. Okay. I talked to them about this, and I think that the way these contracts are drafted, they are almost certain that there's going to be some buyers that will have a buyer broker agreement. They'll agree to pay the money. They'll check the box that says I don't have the funds, because they don't. And that's what I'm going to recommend you guys do. They're going to get in a negotiation where you're going to be involved as their representative. That compensation, the seller on that deal is going to say no. That buyer is going to say, thank you very much, Javier, you're out, because you're not going to work for free. And they're going to proceed unrepresented. Those dots were never connected for me. And it took me my own digging and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. And I'm asking, CAR people and attorneys, and no one's saying that. And I'm saying it. I'm saying that I think there's a possibility that we're going to have, the way these contracts are drafted, you're going to have buyers that are going to be pulling out because there's going to be no compensation agreement and or no compensation available. And the buyers agents are going to say, oh, well, I love you and it's great. I really would love to be able to do something, but I can't work for free. And we're going to have unrepresented buyers. I see it happening. Now I'll leave you with, and I'm not going to take any other questions because you know me, I'll go down a rabbit hole, but I'll leave you with another thought. This used to be done a lot. I haven't seen this done in a very, very long time. Let's suppose that's the case. And let's suppose I'm the agent. But I like this buyer and I know they don't have any money, but I still want to represent them. But I don't want to work for free, but there's no money. I'll tell you what, how about we do this? I'll represent you. And after close of escrow, we're going to record a second trust deed against your house for the amount of the commission. And now I got a deed on a mortgage on their house, second trust deed for 10 grand, 12 grand, 20 grand. Okay. Now they might say, screw that. You know, I'm going to put a deed on my house. But by the way, that's not unusual. That used to be done back when I was a new agent. There were a lot of brokers that did that. A lot of brokers that took trust deeds in lieu of commission. So that's a little too creative for where we are today. But yeah, Javier, you're right. I think that they could proceed unrepresented. The buyer's agent who wrote the offer and got into that part is out. You would have to remove that buyer's from the agency of the transaction, and it's covered in that form we discussed. And I guess we're going to find out. So this will be a conversation that as soon as I hear of one, I will report it to you. And hopefully I hear of none. Okay, guys, we're 2 hours and 50 minutes. This will be on our YouTube channel, probably midday tomorrow, along with all the other sales meetings. And